Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee. My name is Kimberly Soane and I'm the clerk of this committee. Members and officers, please raise your hand to indicate that you wish to speak. Keep your microphones on mute when you're not speaking. Please can I also ask that any questions are kept brief and to the point. We will be timing speeches this evening and an alarm will sound when you've been speaking for 4 minutes. We have a large agenda, so could members please avoid repetition of your fellow councillors' comments so that we can move along as quickly as possible. I also, for the crowd that are in the public gallery, just to let you know that we do have 2 observers this evening, Councillor Paul Follows and Councillor Paul Rivers, who will, as I say, are just observing, so they won't be taking part in the meeting. We also have a couple of ward councillors here who will be speaking on their specific item. Thank you. First item on the agenda is the appointment of chair. We have had a nomination of Councillor Beeman. Could I ask who's nominating? Thank you, Councillor Rivers. And seconder, thank you very much, Councillor Wilden. So any other nominations? No, in that case, can I ask if we are all agreed? Okay. Thank you very much. Second on the agenda is appointment of vice chair, and we have a nomination of Councillor Penny Rivers. Can I have a nomination, please? Thank you, Councillor Beeman. And could I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Wilden. Could Councillor Beeman and Councillor Rivers please come up to the dais?
Well, thank you very much, I think, for nominating me as chair of this committee for the next council year. Welcome, everybody, new councillors as well, and welcome particularly to such a vast public audience. I mean, very good to see you all. And let's hope we have some positive debate tonight. I'm afraid that we have a number of every item's got public speakers on it. And in fact, as a consequence of that, and we have a long agenda, as already been pointed out. Therefore, I am afraid that in debate, we should be strictly enforcing the 4-minute rule. Okay, right, let's move on. Apologies for absence and substitutions. Kimberly.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Graham White, and we have Councillor MacLeod here as substitute.
Thank you very much. Minutes of the last meeting. This is the last meeting of the Western Committee on the 5th of April. And published on the council. Are they correct for those who remember them? Yes. Declarations of interest, Kimberly?
None received, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Coburn.
I just wondered with the new rules whether I really ought to declare an interest in as much as I'm a member of the committee, but I wish to speak on a matter in my ward that I can't vote on. And I don't fully understand how the residents are going to understand that if I don't declare that I have an interest in that application, being the ward member, and therefore I can speak for 4 minutes before and at the end, but I cannot debate, ask questions or vote.
Good point. Good point. Noted. Noted. Okay.
None received, Chair, and we've received none from members either, Chair.
Oh, beat me to it. Guidance or legislation since the last meeting? Anyway? No. No? None. Okay. We could continue. Perhaps we'll arrange ourselves on the top table. Actually, I'm David Beeman, you know. Penny Rivers is the vice chair. You?
I'm Claire Upton Brown, the new joint exec head for planning development.
Kimberly Core, development lead.
Dylan Campbell, principal planner.
Lewis Jones, planning solicitor.
Right, okay, so that everyone knows who we are. I think that's very important. Right, it's more very much right, we'll move on then to the main items on the agenda, which we start with applications all subject to vote seeking tonight. And the first one is WA 2022, the land at Pelgate, Ridgely Road, Chiddingfold, Godalming, GU84QW. Outline application with all matters reserved except for access and layout for the erection of 3 dwellings with associated works. Right, Dylan Campbell, who will be in a lot of tonight, is to present the case.
Thank you very much, Chair. This application is for the outline permission with all matters reserved, except for access and layout for the construction of 3 detached dwellings with scale, appearance and landscaping reserved for future consideration. So to the north of the site, we have Beach Close in Ashcombe. To the south of the site is Wrigley Road. The whole site and the wider surround is within the AONB and AGLV. That's the area of great landscape value. The application site forms part of the garden land located to the rear of Pelgate, accessed here. Oops, sorry. Within the defined Chiddingfold settlement boundary. The proposed site plan shows how 3 dwellings would be accommodated within the site. Each dwelling would be provided with adequate private amenity space, car parking, safe access onto the highway, subject to conditions. So this block plan illustrates with distances the proposed dwellings to the shared boundaries as well as neighbouring rear elevations. It's considered that there is sufficient separation distances from the existing rear elevation windows to the proposed dwellings that the proposal wouldn't result in a detrimental impact in terms of a loss of privacy of neighbouring properties and vice versa, future occupier property. Generally, there's sufficient separation distances from the proposed dwellings from the shared boundaries to avoid any overlooking when reserved matters application comes back in terms of windows and layout. So plot 1, however, is sited approximately 6.5 meters from the shared boundary to the rear to Beach Close. However, the internal layout of this dwelling could be designed in such a way that there would be no first floor habitable room windows looking northwards on that rear facing elevation to avoid any unneighbourly overlooking and could look into the side garden of the plot where there would be sufficient distances from any neighbouring properties. So this second plan shows a cross section demonstrating the relationship between the neighbour here to the rear on Beach Close and the proposed property, plot 1. So here we have the application site looking east. There's also a map down here with an arrow so you can orientate oneself with where we are. So application site looking west down the highway. So that's the front of the application site head on, and here we have the existing access and the proposed access that would be used. The garage here would be demolished to provide access to the rear of the site for the proposed dwellings, and adequate visibility displays can be provided. So here's the rear of the application site looking towards the existing house. You can see here again the garage to be demolished to provide an access road along here. Again, so we've turned around and now facing north. So on these maps, you'll see the arrows, and we're going to look at the rear of the site just to be orientated in a clockwise fashion in terms of the upcoming photos. So this is northwards towards Beach Close. You've got the roofs of the properties here. So to the northwest, this corner of the site here, where plot 1 would sit with its private amenity space. In this area here, you can just catch a glimpse of property on the neighbouring road there. Again, facing directly northwards, houses on the adjacent street. Again, northeast towards Ashcombe. Southeast back towards the existing property that you can see here and where the access road would come in here. And then looking from the furthermost corner of the site, looking back towards the front of the application site. So the key issues with this application are its location within Surrey Hills AONB and AGLB, impact on neighbouring amenity, and the impact on trees and biodiversity. So the site has been subject to some preemptive felling of trees within the site. This loss is regrettable, but officers are mindful that the trees are not protected and can be removed without consent. Conditions have been included in the recommendation for landscaping seem to be submitted, as well as an ecological enhancement strategy, and any reserved matters applications would also be accompanied by a scheme of climate change and sustainability measures. Officers are satisfied that 3 dwellings, along with an access, parking, amenity space and landscaping, can be achieved without resulting in overdevelopment or harm to the character of the area or neighbouring or future occupier amenities. Therefore, the recommendation, the planning application is recommended for approval with conditions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dylan. Right, we have a number of public speakers on this one. The first one being either, is it Tony Weiner or Robin Fryer? It's Mr. Fryer. Robin Fryer, your turn to speak. You have 4 minutes when you start speaking, please. Thank you.
WBC rules require that all information, including the case officer's report, are available at least 5 clear days before the meeting, excluding the day sent or that of the meeting. Reference part 4.6 WBC procedure rules. This was not met. This is another example of the virtual lack of proper notification, consultation, or respect that has been shown by WBC to those affected during the last 12 months. Whilst there has been at least one site visit to Pellgate, no one has thought of viewing things from our side, making it a very one-sided approach. We've had to find out about what has been going on third hand or even by accident. This would not stand up well at a judicial review, which we will seriously consider if forced to. There are a number of important errors and omissions in the planning officer's report, as fully detailed by Tony Weiner in his response sent to you all. I will just highlight some of them. Over 60 bona fide objections or negative comments have been made from residents and organisations, including Chiddingfold Parish Council, Surrey Hills Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, Surrey County Council and Surrey Wildlife Trust. These just cannot be swept under the carpet in a democratic society. The planning officer has failed to provide sufficient cause to make a recommendation of support for the application. Most of the authority's reports include firm caveats or requirements, which have just been ignored. In particular, we challenge the following key aspects: overdevelopment, including urbanisation, severe loss of privacy, shadowing, light pollution, and overlooking, many of which are in direct contradiction to WBC standards and guidance. Our planning consultants dispute the accuracy of the site measurements provided and how they propose properties and parking areas, etc., be shoehorned into the plot. We request an independent detailed survey be carried out. Biodiversity. Bats are 100% present on the site, as well as owls and badgers regularly seen in the near vicinity. The destruction of the trees and habitats scared off all wildlife prior to the survey, making it null and void. No mention is made of the watercourse running down the plot, and tree removal has already resulted in local flooding. A video is available. Road and building foundations will only exacerbate the situation. What about sewage drainage again, missed off the report? The access road, however it is configured, is a major danger and not fully recognised in the Highways report. But it has been specifically reported at ministerial level by Jeremy Hunt MP following his recent visits to the village. Indeed, the proposed neighbourhood plan dwellings opposite Pellgate has been turned down on appeal. One of the main concerns was highway safety. Exactly the same applies to this application. We understand that Pellgate objected to this development. Why? Citing the recently approved so-called backfill development at Hartfield, further down Ridgely Road, is not justifiable since the site is not comparable and has an alternative access route if necessary. Approving this application will open the floodgates for others in the village to do the same and lead to total ruination of Chiddingfold. This constitutes urbanisation, contrary to Chiddingfold's neighbourhood plan. Such applications do nothing to support any element of the community well-being. In fact, the opposite.
Thank you very much, Robin. Right, the next one is Janet Long from the Speaking in Sport. Yeah, she's Speaking in Sport, and Janet Long. Evening, Janet. You have 4 minutes from when you start speaking.
Good evening, councillors. I'm here to speak in support of the application. The scheme represents an infill development within the established settlement area of Chiddingfold, where new housing development is deemed acceptable under local and national plan policy. Part 1 of the Waverley Plan allocates a minimum of 130 dwellings within the parish of Chiddingfold, with policy noting that a number of homes will result from windfall sites. The application site represents such a windfall site. The Chiddingfold Neighbourhood Plan confirms at policy KP1 that development within settlement boundaries is acceptable in principle, subject to compliance with other policies in the development plan. In turn, policy H2, windfall sites, specifically states that residential development on infill sites will be supported on land within the settlement. There has been some confusion in relation to the neighbourhood plan, but as the site lies within the settlement area, is surrounded on 4 sides by residential development. And although it is not identified in the neighbourhood plan, it doesn't need to be, as adopted policy allows for infill. Indeed, Waverley Council policy team identified the site some 15 years ago as being suitable for development in a previous version of the SHLA. Overall, it is clear there is policy support for development on the site. The development is served by an existing access and an extension of the driveway. Suitable sight lines can be achieved, and as such, Surrey County Council have raised no objection to the proposals. The houses have been laid out such that there is suitable separation distance from neighbours to the north and south, so no overlooking will result. And as the case officer pointed out, the recently adopted separation distance standards can be met. As this is an outline application, a condition can be attached to the permission requiring no windows on the north elevation of plot 1, closest to the boundary, to ensure no overlooking of neighbouring gardens or dwellings. In this respect, we submit that no impact on neighbouring amenity will result. There has been concern from neighbours regarding some tree removal. However, as this is a private garden, the applicants were simply removing a number of dead trees. This included the removal of substantial poplar, which, as the council tree officer himself observed, was dead and could have significantly damaged neighbouring houses if it had fallen in a storm. However, as part of the proposal, the applicant has already planted 9 new trees and there is plans for planting more. The applicant over the course of the year has fully cooperated with your planning officers, with all requests for amendments made, and final plans before you this evening have overcome all issues raised in respect of layout, access and parking. We've also worked with the council's arboricultural officer who inspected the site. In conclusion, the site is suitable for 3 new family homes in the village of Chiddingfold, which meet all planning criteria. There is no substantive argument for objecting to the development, and accordingly, your officers are recommending approval. It is a fact that there is a lack of sites for development in the settlement area, such that the council has supported the release of Greenbelt to accommodate the housing needed. This scheme will not require Greenbelt development. Given the above merits, we hope that you'll be able to support the application this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janet. Right, okay, third public speaker we have is from Chiddingfold Parish Council, Christine Tebboth, I believe. Christine, when you get down, you have 4 minutes from when you start speaking, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of the Parish Council, I wish to put this application within the context of the Chiddingfold Neighbourhood Plan, which was made in August 2021. To recap briefly, as a large village within the borough, we were required to plan for a minimum of 130 houses over the plan period and also expected to deliver windfall development. As a result of the postponing of LPP2 and in conjunction with our neighbourhood planning officer, we decided to have a call for sites ourselves and lead on the revision of our village settlement boundary. The call for sites took place in 2017, and one of the sites put forward at that time was the land behind Hartfield, which the planning officer referred to in his report. This land is a field and is not backland development. The field is bounded on 3 sides by gardens, but is not and has never been a garden itself. The site was assessed by the steering group. However, the landowners themselves withdrew from the process due to a family bereavement. The Parish Council determined that as part of the redrawing of the village settlement boundary, this field would be included so that if it became available for development at a later date, it would constitute windfall development. This is exactly what has happened. It is not therefore a precedent for backland development in Ridgely Road. However, this application before you would set such a precedent. Our second point concerns the land opposite Pellgate, which we referred to as site HA2 in our neighbourhood plan. This is our second largest development site, and the developer Vanderbilt Homes submitted an application for 23 houses, which went to appeal last year. The inspector visited the site in February this year, and in his report dismissing the appeal, his reasons included the effect on the character of the area, highway safety, and loss of biodiversity. He described Ridgely Road as residential in nature, with houses which are mainly detached, 2-storey, road-facing, and traditional in form and appearance. The proposed backland development at Pellgate would have a detrimental effect on the character of this part of Ridgely Road and exacerbate the concerns about highway safety, which the inspector also detailed. We need development at HA2 to go ahead in order to deliver our housing target and do not want the Pellgate application to prejudice this in any way. Our final point concerns the loss of biodiversity. The ecology report took place in January 22, in which it was indicated only limited garden clearance would take place on the site. What has actually happened since then has been 3 episodes of tree felling, with a total of 12 trees of different species being lost. The report only looked for evidence of roosting bats, whereas we know from other research that Chiddingfold is a prime location for foraging bats, for whom insect populations and therefore trees are critical. The biodiversity checklist failed to acknowledge the presence of a watercourse traversing the site. Chiddingfold is on heavy Wealden clay, and surface water flooding is an increasing problem in the parish. 3 large trees overlooked the plan house at plot 3, and it is likely that these trees will need to be felled in addition to those already lost, contrary to our policy NE2. In conclusion, for these reasons, the Parish Council asks that the application is refused.
Thank you very much. Right, the final public speaker is in fact one of the ward councillors, Councillor Dave Busby. I think, is he here? Oh yes, yes. Okay, right, okay, Councillor Busby, you have 4 minutes now, and you then have the right, of course, to 4 minutes after the debate. Councillor Busby.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee members, for looking at this application, which, if approved, could have significant implications for further such backland development on Ridgely Road, where currently there is none. The application is on a site not allocated within the Chiddingfold Neighbourhood Plan, a plan that is on course to deliver 130 new dwellings required of the village, along with additional housing on a number of suitable windfall sites, as the village traditionally always has. This application is on a site that, if developed, would result in the loss of the only open green space in this specific part of the village, with the resulting negative impact on biodiversity. Given the relatively small size and the topography of the site, I cannot see any feasible way that 3 4-bedroom homes can be built without an unacceptable loss to the privacy residents of Beach Close currently enjoy. Given the gradient of the plot, in my view, it is unavoidable that the proposed new dwellings will be overbearing, over-dominant, and cause serious harm to the amenity of residents of number 3 and 4 Beach Close in particular. I'd like to thank the case officer for all of his work on this application and for his report, and would like to draw members' attention to 2 specific areas for their review. Firstly, the reference to the recent approval for 5 dwellings at Hartfield. This is some distance away and a very different site, so I would query any direct comparison. The Hartfield proposal is on an open field that has never been used as a residential garden and is currently accessible from Ballsdown, as well as the proposed new access from Ridgely Road. It's on a stretch of road with smaller homes, and approval was given to build 5 dwellings on a site of over 7,000 metres squared, much more in keeping with the surrounding area. This compares with three dwellings at Pellgate on a site far less than half the size and is surrounded by larger homes. The difference in density, setting and context between Hartfield and this proposal is so huge that in my view, it cannot be directly comparable. Secondly, the density of the proposed new dwellings is compared with those of both Ridgely Road and Beach Close. But this application is for new dwellings on Ridgely Road with access from Ridgely Road. So I would suggest that the comparison to Beach Close is not relevant. The report suggests that the density of the proposed development is appropriate in light of the transition from the smaller plots to the north, Beach Close, to the larger plots to the south, Ridgely Road. But I would query this assessment, as Ridgely Road, made up mainly of large Edwardian homes, and Beach Close, a 1970s development, are completely separate areas of the village with very different street scenes. I'd also briefly like to reference something not mentioned in the report, which is the appeal dismissal for the site directly opposite Pellgate earlier this year. The inspector recognised the uniform street scene of this part of Ridgely Road and concluded that the scheme would significantly harm the character and appearance of the area. This application would lead to the same harm, so should also be refused. In summary, this section of Ridgely Road has a consistent character of large houses with large undeveloped gardens. This proposal represents overdevelopment, completely out of character to the surrounding area, which has no backland development at the moment and will cause unacceptable harm and loss of amenity to neighbouring residents. Again, thank you members and officers for your time in considering this application.
Thank you very much. You have the right to 4 minutes after the debate, Councillor Lovely, so I hope you stay there. Right, I want to open with one question actually to the planning officer. I note that much has been made of this. In your report, you said there was no objection received from either Surrey Wildlife Trust, Surrey Highways, or in fact, or Surrey Highways. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, and conditions were recommended.
Open to debate, councillors. Who wants to go? Councillor Rubini.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at this, I mean, first of all, we all know, unfortunately, that the government is now imposing housing on us, and we have to find land to accommodate those numbers of housing. And one of the problems I have is that if we're not careful, we get more and more applications in the AONB, Greenbelt and other areas. This at least is an area that is already built on. I accept, unfortunately, that it is a field and that it isn't built on itself. However, it is surrounded by housing. Part of my point is that there's been great play on the scenery from Ridgely Road. Yet I can't see how they're going to see those houses from any of the other roads, because that appears to be in the middle of the housing area. And I can't see it's going to be seen by any of the roads. My main point though is the track. I can understand obviously that that is the way of getting people in and out. What I would like to know, please, from the officers is, what is it going to be made of? Because my one concern is noise. But if somebody's coming in the early hours, if this is going to be gravel or whatever, then this could create noise. So at the moment, from your pictures, it is obviously not made up. Is this intended to make it up so it's a more quiet area, or what's the intention?
Do you wish to answer that, Dylan?
So condition 4 relates to the submission and approval in writing of all materials, including hard surfacing materials.
So it'll be a hard surface, it doesn't make much noise.
Potentially.
Don't give me the answer. Councillor Coburn?
Thank you, Chairman. I've got great concerns about this. When I first saw it, I didn't really have quite the concerns that I now have, but I've done my homework. I have read the neighbourhood plan, which is, fortunately for the Chiddingfold, still within the 2-year grace period, and it does allocate sites. And I think if neighbourhood planning in this borough is going to be worth doing, then we have to be seen as a group of people to be supporting it. When I first saw it, I thought it was unbalanced for 3 and perhaps 2. But listening to the positive way in which the parish council has actually allocated sites, you know, I really feel this is almost kicking them in the teeth when this application does not seem to follow the pattern of what they're trying to achieve in the village as a whole. And I do think neighbourhood planning is much more than about allocating the sites. It's about choosing the sites that you also don't allocate, especially with the impact we now have on biodiversity. I mean, we have, and we will have even stronger rules on biodiversity coming in. Surrey has got its nature recovery network up and running, and it's very much part of what we're supposed to do. So I think this is too much. I think it's premature on this particular site. Whether anything is on this site, I'd have to go back, but looking at what we've got to make the decision on, which is 3 largish houses on relatively small plots when you look at the area. I don't like anything, and I've said this so many times in this committee, where you have to mess around with the fenestration to avoid overlooking. You know, if you can't do it by design, I hate obscure glass in anything but bathrooms, and I hate walls with absolutely no life in them. You know, I think it's bad design. So for a series of reasons, I agree with I think the councillor said it, that I think it is overdevelopment and not in compliance with the Chiddingfold neighbourhood plan, which still is relatively new. And I would find it very hard to support the recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Spence?
Thank you, Chairman. I likewise have some concerns here about overdevelopment, and I think the 2 in particular. We've heard representations this evening about the distances between the houses and the accuracy of the plans. So I would ask if the officer could perhaps comment on what he's heard and compare, you know, to the figures in his report to what the representations we had from the public today were. The second concern I have here is about parking. These are, I think, 4-bedroom houses. My understanding, I think, was that the guidelines for 3+ bedroom houses are a minimum of 2.5 car parking places each. And that one of the houses, I think the 3rd one along, appears from the plan only to have 2. So again, could the officer please comment on that? I think these are, you know, particular concerns given the concentration of housing in what is a relatively small plot. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to speak? Nothing. Say. McLeod.
Thank you, Chairman. I wonder if the officers could comment on 2 points, please. First is the comments made by the objector that there was insufficient notice given in terms of this application. But a bit more importantly, if they could comment on Councillor Coburn's points that she made, which seemed to me to be very important. Within the report, it suggested that the tilted balance is engaged. From what Councillor Coburn said, it isn't actually engaged, and that within 2 years of the neighbourhood plan have been approved, and it allocates sites. So I think that's an extremely important point. I think we need to have the officers' comments on these 2 points, please.
Thank you. Officer.
I did double check the distances on the submitted block plan and distance between the shared boundaries and neighbouring properties, and they matched my original measurements in the officer's report. I don't have the objection to hand with alternative measurements, but I did double check my own measurements against the scaled plan with the scale bar included on the submitted plan, and they were accurate. In terms of parking spaces, there is that 2.5 parking space figure. It's difficult to apply a half a parking space to a dwelling because it wouldn't fit a car. It is a somewhat it is a standard that is supposed to be used on dwellings as well as flats. So you can imagine if you had multiple flats with shared parking areas, half a space would add up to a whole space in a communal parking scenario. Where there's individual dwellings with private off-road parking spaces, generally a 3-bed property, 2 parking spaces, it would be adequate, and it's not something we would look to refuse permission against. Thank you.
So I think we've got a couple of other questions. The first one is on the what day the planning agenda was published. So I think Democratic Services, can you answer?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. The agenda was published initially on the 6th of June under Western Planning. However, since then we have had a full council meeting where it was agreed that we would go from 2 committee meetings to 1. So therefore the agenda was then republished under Planning Committee on the 9th of June.
And then in terms of the tilted balance and whether that is a reason for refusal, the tilted balance obviously and it is on all policies and it's on our 5-year housing land supply. And if we can demonstrate real harm to something, then at that point the tilted balance doesn't apply. So I think if members are looking for advice on whether or not the tilted balance applies to this application, the advice would be that we're not can't demonstrate to you any harm, and therefore the tilted balance does apply in your consideration of this application this evening.
I'll let you come back, Councillor Gowan, on this occasion.
Thank you. So it was just to question what Claire's just said. I mean, maybe I'm misinterpreting the Chiddingfold neighbourhood plan, but presumably para 14 kicks in if it's a plan under 2 years old and it allocates sites. So therefore the tilted balance doesn't apply automatically.
So just to confirm the point, your neighbourhood plan allocates sites, but it's also within the policy in the neighbourhood plan that allows for windfall sites. So this is accords with this policy in that it is a site within your settlement boundary. It's backland site, series of gardens served off and access. So it is within that policy in that it would be not an allocated site, but effectively a windfall site within the neighbourhood plan area.
Well, then we must move then to the recommendation. And the recommendation is that subject to conditions 1 to 19, and I presume an additional condition about windows on the north facing side, yeah. That an informant on to vote outline permission be granted. Those in favour, please raise their hands. Those against?
Sorry, Chair.
Sorry, I'm a bit,
Favours again, please.
yes.
Favours.
Against? Abstain? Result?
Thank you, Chair. That's 8 in favour, 5 against and 1 abstention, therefore it's carried.
Thank you very much. Okay, right, we have to move on. The next application will be 2022-01984, land units 1 to 5 Huxtile Lane, Farnham, GU9 8LG. An outline application for 7 dwellings, no more than 1,000 square metres of floor space, with vehicle access to Huxtile Lane, with some matters reserved. Landscaping, right.
Chairman, can we just take a second to allow people
Oh,
to
yeah,
leave
sure,
the chamber?
Sure. So I'm moving on. Thank you. Right. Right. Before we start this, I would point out to members that in fact there's already an approval granted on appeal for 24 apartments on this site, following an initial refusal by Waverley Borough Council. Anyway, Dylan, to present again.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, so this application is for outline permission with landscaping as a reserved matter for the construction of 7 dwellings. And as mentioned by the Chair, there is a extant permission recently allowed on appeal in January, I believe, for the outline permission with all matters reserved except for access for the construction of 24 flats. So this application, this application site is located on Huxtile Lane. Here, to the north, we have some existing railway lines. To the south is Arthur Road, located at a higher land level than the application site. To the west is Arthur Close, and to the east, northeast, is the existing access onto Firgrove Hill. The site is occupied by existing industrial buildings here and associated parking. So this is the proposed street scene and block plan. You can see the 7 dwellings illustrated here. Each house has amenity space, highways access, turning head, and parking. I would like to highlight that 2 parking spaces to serve one of the dwellings has been omitted in error from the proposed site plan. The site plan has been reviewed and it is considered by officers that there is adequate space in the site to provide 2 additional parking spaces to accommodate that dwelling. So therefore, an additional condition would be suggested requiring the submission of a parking layout plan prior to commencement of development. So each dwelling would be provided with an element of amenity space to the rear each property. You can see that the majority of them are quite shallow and wouldn't provide sort of adequate amenity space considered sort of in isolation. Therefore, each dwelling has been provided with a generous private outdoor amenity space in the form of a roof terrace, which we'll see on the proposed floor plan shortly, which would measure 8.4 meters in width and approximately 8.5 meters in depth. So it would be the entire footprint of the property worth of roof terrace. The properties are staggered along the highway in a linear form with generous spaces in between properties to provide some visual relief. There would be quite contemporary in design and appearance, comprising cladding facing brickwork and aluminium windows, again with that flat roof design, which is quite a creative way to sort of address the private amenity issue with the site, given its constraints. This also allows the dwellings to provide solar panels to the roofs. If I move on, we might be able to see them. So there's a section plan here showing the relationship of the proposed dwelling with the ground level on Arthur Road. So you can see there is quite a significant land level change. So this sort of change in levels and the design and orientation of the site addresses any sort of concerns with a loss of daylight, sunlight or outlook, or any sort of overbearing impact for the occupiers of Arthur Road. There are first floor, so the first floor is here. There'd be first floor rear facing elevation windows, and you can see that with the land level changes, there would be no views into the rear gardens along Arthur Road. There's a covered canopy area to the roof terrace to prevent any views backwards over into that private amenity space of the neighbouring property. So here are the elevations for house type 1 and house type 2. So there's a slight variation where the land levels fall away to the west of the site, that there is ground floor access for the two end properties. So there's a slight variation in the plans. You can see the roof terrace here, stepped access with a covered area over and no windows to the rear portion of the property to prevent any unneighbourly overlooking. There would be some overlooking between roof terraces of each property, but these would be sort of views out to the side. As you saw from the site plan, there is generous spacings between the properties. It wouldn't be too dissimilar to neighbours being able to overlook ordinary rear gardens or have first floor windows that overlook their own private amenity space, as well as neighbouring gardens to either side in the peripheries of outlook. And so here are some photos. This is the application site from the railway bridge on Fairgrove Hill, looking back in this direction. So it's quite a landscaped boundary, and there would be little, if any, views of the proposed properties from this location. This is the existing access into the site, the same access that was proposed and approved at appeal for the application for 24 flats. Would make use of the same access whereby the inspector considered the existing vision displays, the width of the existing access track, along with the proposed enhancements of the track, which are also proposed as this part of the scheme. So a shared surface that's delineated from a change in materials, which would be conditioned. So we're making our way down the track further into the application site here. So this is the gate into the industrial area. Further into the track, so some of the existing buildings to be demolished. Again, further down into the site, see the arrows here. The height, the site is heavily enclosed. So looking south towards Arthur Road, it is hard to appreciate from these photos and the sort of the daylight and the shadow contrast to the change in land level from the application site. Looking back towards the access, and this is just to outline what has been allowed at appeal. So these are the elevations of the outline permission, illustrative of the flats. So you've got blocks of flats here, up to 3 stories in height with pitched roofs, existing access, and you can see the existing properties dashed in a fainter line, and some renders of the appeal permission. So on that basis, officers are satisfied that 7 dwellings, along with the existing / proposed access, parking, amenity space and landscaping, can be achieved without resulting in an overdevelopment of the site or harm to the character of the area or neighbouring or future occupier amenities. Therefore, the application is recommended for approval, subject to completion of the appropriate legal agreement in relation to SPA contributions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, we have public speaking on this item as well. I would again like to remind members that there's already approved application. There are 24 apartments on this site. And if you haven't wanted, you could build them tomorrow, I suppose. Right, okay, the public speakers, the first one is Lucy Jacob. You have 4 minutes from when you start speaking.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Lucy Jacob and I live at number 6 Arthur Road, immediately to the south of the site. And I'm speaking for the Fairgrove Residents Group, formed in 2018 to help residents engage in the planning process of challenging site. This application follows several other proposals.
Can I stop you, Mrs. Jacob? I'm afraid, unfortunately, there's an awful feedback from your microphone and we can't actually hear you.
Okay,
That's
is that
better.
yeah?
That's better.
Okay. Sorry. Shall I start? Can I start again? Is that allowed? Or do you want me to pick up from where I was?
And
Start again.
Okay. Sorry, start again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Lucy Jacob and I live at number 6 Arthur Road, immediately to the south of the site. And I'm speaking on behalf of the Fairgrove Residents Group, formed in 2018 to help residents engage in the planning process for this challenging site. This application follows several other proposals to convert a difficult plot with a very restricted access road to residential use. These applications have attracted hundreds of responses, including over 30 in this case. The revised plans in this application are the closest yet to an acceptable solution for residents, though there are still significant issues raised. The issues would be sufficient to refuse outline permission. However, if the committee is minded to approve the application, the issue should be clearly and directly addressed in the planning conditions. Residents support the measures taken to limit overlooking surrounding properties, the restricted height and the distancing of the boundaries of the buildings from boundaries. 7 homes is also only slightly above the numbers considered acceptable for this site. For this reason, 4 of our residents moved from object to a neutral position. Amongst those still opposed, there are 3 main points raised. Firstly, parking. Residents strongly agree with the officer's view that 2 parking spaces per house is a bare minimum for 3-bedroom houses. The plans, as already noted in the meeting, have 12 spaces for the 7 houses and not 14 as noted in the officer's report. Existing parking for the old Mission Hall has also been removed, so the committee should be seeking 16 spaces. Secondly, access. As you've seen, Hookstar Lane is very narrow, mostly varying between 3.7 metres and 2.8 metres, with no passing places and restricted visibility at the junction with Fairgrove Hill. Residents have commissioned an expert report for each application, which each outlined the challenges. The reports noted that the local highway authority guidance should limit a shared private driveway to 6 houses. It has consistently been impossible to design a safe scheme for shared use, and the revised plans are the most dangerous road layout yet, with no provision for a passing place save the turning point. 2 accidents have occurred in the last 3 weeks at this part of Fairgrove Hill, including a vehicle leaving Hookstar Lane. Final comments from the Highway Authority have not yet been seen, and these highly sensitive safety issues mean the committee must insist on hearing this before proceeding. Thirdly, amenity space. We note that bike sheds, space for bins and vehicle charging points aren't marked in the map, and whilst they will be considered at the detail stage, they will likely impact already very limited amenity space for family homes. The committee should ensure adequate high-quality amenity space is provided. In summary, the recent appeal decision for an earlier application on the site found that the tilted balance is in favour of development. In that context, and given the current dilapidated state of the site, residents are keen to see that it is developed, believe that 7 houses is almost acceptable, but strongly recommend that the committee strengthens the planning conditions to ensure that adequate parking, safe access, and adequate amenity space are clear requirements for development. Thank you.
thank you very much. Right, the next one here is John Boyes. John Boyes is online. He's online. All right, John, you got 4 minutes.
Okay. Can you see me? Hello?
Yes, we can see you.
All right, okay. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to introduce myself, John Boys. I'm the applicant for the proposed redevelopment of Hookstyle Lane Trading Estate. This has been a long, arduous process dating back to 2016, when, as part of the pre-application with Waverley Borough Council, they supported the development of up to 55 flats on the dilapidated industrial site. After engagement with Waverley, unfortunately, the original application for 39 flats with underground parking was refused. Subsequent amended plan application for 24 flats with underground parking, whilst it was supported by Waverley Borough Council, was refused at planning committee. The application in question is WA 2020-0558, which I might add was at a considerable cost and was approved on appeal on the 9/11/2022. A subsequent application for a reduced planning in principle of up to 1,000 metres of development was again supported by Waverley Borough Council and was again refused at planning committee on a technicality of not being able to achieve a section 106 contribution for habitat loss, despite no objections by Natural England. The current outline application with reserved matters for 7 detached dwellings with a gross development of 1,000 square metres is an iteration of this previously refused proposal with the ability to facilitate any section 106 contributions. I've sent a copy of the scheme of 7 dwellings over to Waverley Borough Council for presentation at tonight's committee, which shows the approved scheme of 24 flats overlaid on the current proposal to demonstrate that this is significantly less impactful than the development which has been approved. In terms of bulk and mass, the approved scheme equates to a gross area of almost 2,000 metres squared, with an additional 1,200 metres squared of underground parking, which would entail 1,500 cubic metres of extracted soil. With regard to parking, there are 39 spaces, which is significantly in excess of the parking spaces provided for the current scheme, which I may add is 2 parking spaces per unit. I refer to item 49 of the appeal decision. It is an agreed matter of the council cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply of deliverable housing sites. The council calculate they have a 4.3 year worth of housing land supply, which I consider to be a considerable shortfall. In these circumstances, footnote 9.8 of the framework establishes that the policies which are most important in determining the application are out of date. Consequently, permission should be granted unless any adverse impacts can significantly or demonstrably outweigh the benefits. When assessed against the policies in the framework taken as a whole, the site is not within a protected area. The current scheme offers a development of 7 eco houses, which would add to the current supply of houses in the Waverley Borough. Currently, we only have received any interest from affordable housing providers, and given the flat development ongoing in Farnham, we feel that family housing is of need. There's been media coverage, most notably Michael Gove, on the approval of applications in the Waverley Borough, and Farnham Herald, highlighting taxpayers' money spent on the unsuccessful defence of planning applications dating back to 2017. In light of the housing supply, we seek your recommendations to approve the scheme and avoid any further appeals which would happen, and we would be seeking an award for costs should this happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boyd. Right, the ward councillor, Councillor Hyman, wishes to speak 4 minutes now and 4 minutes afterwards. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Well, yes, indeed, this is certainly an improvement on what was given outline consent in the appeal. I'm very disappointed, though, that there's a certain amount of information which is very important to members, which isn't available to us. Mrs. Jacob has already mentioned the lack of these a swept off diagram for an SCC's comments on that. I'm not sure whether this this is a sort of red herring, because what the swept path diagram we really need to see is for the access at the bell mouth, which doesn't really exist. There's a bell mouth turning in from Firgrove Hill into the narrow lane, which is shown on various plans, but it's actually on the land of a parking space of Farnham Marble and can't be used or included. We still have the issue of claims that the access lane is over 4 meters wide. There's room for a 1 or 1.2 meter path. It's not. If you go and actually measure it yourself with a tape measure, and I'd urge people to ask for a site visit, it's 2.8 meters at its narrowest point, 3.2 meters at the access point. It would be very difficult to find anywhere where it's over 4 meters other than right down at the bottom of the site. And although Surrey County Council claim to have checked it themselves, they've obviously had a highly biased tape measure when they've done so. This is a difficult site. We are very close, I think, to a resolution on it. The parking issue has now been revived because the appeal scheme that has been approved, which is only outline and could be overturned or does not have to be granted at reserved matters. That provides underground parking, but is expensive and is unlikely to go ahead. And obviously, is far preferable for the developer and easier, and although possibly in the longer term not quite so profitable. This has gone on a long time, and we want to see a resolution to it. But we've got no swept path diagram. We've got no appropriate assessment. We don't have in front of us, and we have asked for this before, and it is a matter of course, has been agreed that we will receive it in our committee papers in the officer reports, that relevant appeal decisions will be in there. I know it would add 17 pages to the length of this report, but we don't have the officer report here. And so members here aren't aware of what it actually says. It wrongly assumes that the presumption in favour and the tilted balance is engaged, which it isn't. Because paragraph 182 of the MPPF says the presumption in favour of sustainable development does not apply where the plan of project is likely to have a significant effect on habitat sites, alone or in combination with other plans of projects, unless an appropriate assessment has concluded the plan of project will not adversely affect the integrity of the habitat site. The inspector concluded that Waverley has conducted an appropriate assessment, but in 17 years we have never had an appropriate assessment of the effectiveness of Farnham Park as Sang, for instance, or the effectiveness of Natural England's mitigation measures. They're unable to provide that. Everyone's in denial because it would limit development across a wide area. But isn't it time we obeyed the law? Shouldn't we be doing that and doing what the law tells us we have to have some sort of limitation? I'm pleased with with the improvement, but this needs to be seen. There are lots of employment issues still there. You may wish to comment on the design issue, residential amenity issue. Do rooftops replace open gardens? I'm not sure, that's up to you. But the highway safety access, the inspector stated, I found the proposal conflicts with policies ST1 and LRC1 of the local plan, FMP 30 of the FMP, and effects of highway safety and provision of play space. He found it contrary to policy. And so I'd like you to consider this carefully. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, councillors, anybody wish to speak on this item? Yes, Councillor Coburn.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Well, as I think Mrs. Jacobs said, this is a great improvement, thank goodness. Anybody who knows the area will know that we all thought putting any housing down here was madness with that access. And certainly we lost, basically. The inspector said, yeah, it was perfectly okay for 24 flats. But so we'll just have to take that. How you are going to get these people in safely, I still don't really know. You know, every time you go out of Sun and Moon or any of the other shops on that area, you take your life in your hands. If a bus is coming out of the station approach, you have to stop because there's not enough room. I mean, you wouldn't start from here, but this is where we are. When we looked at this site for the neighbourhood plan, we suggested if it were to go to residential, but it was too small for our allocation, they should actually approach it from Arthur Close, the fat end, if you like, of the site. But given where we are, then I think with the some of the provisos that Mrs. Jacob mentioned, I can live with the neighbouring amenity in as much as we have a similar sort of lot, if you like, of flats or houses. They're townhouses really, with the amenity space on the top, and they overlook the local tip. Very scenic. So, you know, having this lot with things overlooking the railway line is probably one up from that. So I can live with that. But the parking is an issue. And I know Dylan pointed out that in fact there's 2 per house, that's 14. But the question of the old mission hall was raised. And of course that is important because that's always had parking. So when it comes in, you know, can we add additional parking at any point? What are we looking at the moment? You know, it's an outline. Obviously, they're going to come in for more design. But in terms of parking, can we ask for the those 2 to be sort of considered as well? Because I'd hate to refuse this on the 2 parking spaces, but it is an issue. The other issue is 2 cars meeting, because you know, whatever you say, you can't get 2 cars. And the reason it worked for industrial was that, you know, basically people came in, stayed for 2 or 3 hours, and then, you know, it was sort of 1 vehicle at a time, and it was mainly motorbikes. So that was quite easy to come in and out. So it is going to be a bit cramped, and as much parking as we can ask for, and also to make sure that people can actually pass safely, even if they can't pass safely at the far end, if they could pass safely where they can see the end, because just before you get to the mission hall, you can actually see the end, and you can see whether anything else is trying to get in. So if at reserve matter stage or at this point we can actually change that, then I would be very supportive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Keane. Councillor Keane.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I do agree with Councillor Coburn. I think this is a great improvement on what we've been shown on past plans, and I think that's a very good thing. I hear what's being said about the rooftop space, but equally, I feel very sad that there's no space for children to play outside, because, you know, a rooftop garden's all very well for one thing, but if you want to take your child outside and there's nowhere to play, that's sad. The narrow lane, I do know this lane actually. I might live in Hazelmere, but I know the lane. And my concern is that, you know, if 2 people meet on that very narrow piece of road and one tries to reverse out backwards onto the road, there could be a nasty accident. So I think that's something that's got to be considered here. There's no passing spaces, so somebody's got to give somewhere in order to get to and from. I certainly agree about the parking spaces. I think, you know, 2 parking spaces per unit. Yes, I know that's what we have to have, but then you have to consider that there's going to be maybe children there that drive and so on. So we do need a couple of extra spaces, if that could be put in, please. And well, I think that was about it, but I certainly am concerned about that lane. I really am. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think we're all concerned about that lane, but having said that, we must remember they've got applications for 24 pounds if it's all week. Anyway, let's anybody else want to speak? No? Oh, Councillor Weldon.
Thank you. I've listened carefully, and I understand and sympathise with some of the concerns from the local people. And I am particularly concerned about, understand the concerns about access, which sounds extremely difficult. However, we also know that there is already approval on appeal for 24 apartments. If access is difficult for 7 houses, it will be even more difficult for 24 apartments, and yet that has been approved. I'm concerned that if we refuse it, it goes to appeal and we lose again. That's not a good look. So that is my overriding concern. Thank you.
Any other councillor wish to speak? I think we have to remember this is only an outline application, and a number of the concerns have been raised to be dealt with as a matter. Yes, Claire?
Can I just confirm maybe on the point that's been raised about parking for the community hall? Looking at the outline permission that's already been granted, that was granted 24 flats, 39 parking spaces with no additional provision for the community hall. So I think given that, you know, effectively that permission is our fallback position, it would be very difficult for us to justify further parking for the community hall. I think also looking at the plan, there is very limited space. So there's 2 parking spaces per unit, which would be a total of 14 parking spaces. And just on the sort of the point of access, and that is something that we can work with the applicant on. But again, just comparing the parking spaces and the number of flats, we've got a significant reduction in the traffic generated by this development versus what already has permission.
Thank you. I think I'd like to stress again, we were talking about our application here, on these things out for
Yes, it's outlined.
Outline. And they've already Councillor, as it said, we weren't allowing people to come back. Go on, quick.
Well, surely if somebody says something and you disagree, you have to be able to come back. I mean, the Old Mission Hall is not a community hall. We're not asking for parking spaces for a community hall. It's a dwelling. And what I'm asking for is, could we not ask the applicant if we could possibly have 2 spaces? Nobody's saying turn it down because we haven't got them. We're just saying it will be, from my point of view, as a Waverley member of this planning committee, we are supposed to deliver good planning developments. And it will be better if there were 16 parking spaces. And I don't see really why we can't ask for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
So
Chairman.
maybe if I can come back on that point. My response to the question is because we're in a decision-making meeting and I want members to be very clear what they're making a decision on and also what officers are or aren't going to do post that decision. So we all need to be clear on that. So you can't leave the meeting this evening thinking I'm going to find some more parking spaces on here if that's not possible. If members are wanting officers to explore the possibility of further parking, and it would need to be done before we grant a permission, then the route you go down this evening is to delegate authority to me to ask that question. But you would then need to have a second position, delegated position for me to say that I can carry on and issue the permission if they're not able to provide additional parking. The other option obviously is to defer and to bring it back to another meeting to discuss it again when I have the answer, but I can't this evening sit here and commit the developer to additional parking spaces because it's not before us this evening to consider, and it's not within my gift to make him do things that he's not actually required to do as part of the mission. So members, I hope that advice is helpful to you to clarify, you know, where you go with the question that has been asked.
I think it's quite clear where I am. Okay, right. Right, Councillor Hyman, you've got another 4 minutes, Councillor Hyman.
Yes, I don't intend to use all of that, but I would agree. I think that the issue of the parking is there was obviously no issue with a scheme which had a large amount of housing that might have been able to afford to pay for a large amount of underground parking. We don't have that. We don't have that within this scheme, so it is completely different, and there are parking issues. I think deferral would be a good idea because that option allows it to come back to you with full knowledge, with a site visit for yourselves to look at highway safety if you wanted to attend, for the new members, because it is the sort of site that really needs a site visit, where you can look at the access problems and the assumptions are being made, but also for officers to put the appeal decision in front of you as it should be within your documents, so that you can have a chance to go through it and really see what the inspector did say and understand what sort of permission is available, because that was for a different site. It did include the Old Mission Hall. It was a larger site than this application is. It doesn't have the Old Mission Hall with it. So we're not comparing apples with apples entirely. And I think it would be important for it to come back with that parking sorted, because there are serious issues here with the length of that and people having to reverse the length of the road and possibly reverse out onto the main road, which need to be considered before you decide, yes, this is the right amount of housing here. And as you've heard from the residents, 6 houses to a lane is Surrey standard, but that's only a guideline. Suffolk say 5 is their guideline for a lane of that length and that size. 6 dwellings off of it. This, with the others, would be 9 in total, so well over. So, you know, perhaps slightly less housing would be able to satisfy things, and you would be able to provide that extra parking space. That would need negotiation. It could come back in a fortnight or a month's time and sort this once and for all. This has been around a long time, this application. A few more weeks wouldn't make any difference to get it right. Thanks.
Right, thank you. Any more? I think we have to make a decision tonight, I think, actually, on this item. And I'm going to move straight to recommendation. The recommendation is recommendation A, that subject to the completion of an appropriate legal agreement to secure the financial contributions towards the ongoing maintenance and enhancement of Farnham Park, and subject to conditions that outline planning should be granted. Recommendation B, that in the event that section 106 agreement is not completed within 6 months of the date of the resolution to grant permission be refused. Can those in favour please raise their hands? Those against? Abstain? Result?
Thank you, Chairman. That's unanimous. Sorry, everybody's in favour. Thank you, Chair.
Big word, isn't it? Yeah, quite. Thank you. Right, apologies. We now move on to another 2 items about 17 Fensham Road, Lower Bourne, Farnham. I want to take these applications as totally separate applications and dealt with accordingly. I think that's the right way. I don't want people mixing them up, please. I think otherwise we'll get all confused, and that's not that's not how we should do it. So the first one is WA 2023-00103, land as known as 17 Fensham Road, Lower Bourne, Farnham, GU 98HF. The erection of a dwelling with associated works following demolition of the original dwelling. And again, guess what? It's Dylan again. Dylan.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, so this application is for the construction of a dwelling with associated works following the demolition of the original dwelling, the existing dwelling on site. This site will be familiar to some members due to the recent planning history. So the application site is here, outlined in red. It's directly east of Frensham Road, which runs along here, north of Stream Farm Close, which is here. The land levels increase from south to north quite steeply, and there are other dwellings located in the area. It's a predominantly residential area. So the applicant sought, sorry, I confused my slides. Planning permission was previously granted for a dwelling. However, the dwelling was not built in accordance with the approved plans or conditions of that original permission granted in 2017. The permission was not lawfully implemented and has since expired. The applicant sought to remedy that breach by submitting an application for what had been constructed on the site in its current form. That application was refused and dismissed appeal in November 2022. In the inspector's appeal decision, the principle of residential development on the site, as well as its form, height, scale, and appearance and design ethos, was considered acceptable for such development on that site. This application is to demolish the existing unauthorized dwelling located here, outlined in red. So that's the location of the dwelling as it exists. Demolish that and construct a dwelling in, keep losing the mouse, construct a dwelling in the previously approved location. It will be the same size, scale, and bulk in the exact same position setback into the hillside at the same height as previously approved in 2017. So moving on to the site sections. So you've got the as-built and proposed site sections outlined in red is what is currently on site with its large bulk mass and height sited further forward down the existing sloping site that you can see just through here. And again, construction of a dwelling further back into the site and lower, identical to what was previously approved. So we've got the front elevation of the proposal here. It would be modern in design and appearance. There would be a parking area at the lower ground floor level, habitable accommodation on the 2 stories above that. In the previously approved location. The dwelling would comprise a sedum roof. Materials for the elevations would be a combination of vertical oak cladding in a dark colour to the upper floors, stone walls to the lower floors, and dark grey aluminium windows, which would help the dwelling integrate with the partly wooded surroundings, again similar to the previously approved scheme. So this is the rear elevation of the proposal. You can see the low profile of the dwelling set back into the slope, minimising its presence in the local townscape. Here's the west elevation viewed from Frensham Road. So we saw the street scene section earlier. So that's the same elevation zoomed in. This is the east side of the site. You'd catch glimpsed views sort of from this side from the adjacent road, Steam Farm Close. The proposed lower ground floor plan, so you've got a carport access into the property and then an internal staircase leading up to the proposed upper ground floor that provides 3 bedrooms and a study and a landing area. And then the top floor, the dining room, kitchen, drawing room and master bedroom. So this is the front elevation plan of the site from Steam Farm Close of the existing as-built development to be demolished. Front side elevation from Steam Farm Close. Front elevation from Frensham Road, looking back towards the dwelling. You can see the land level changes just to the rear and how the road slopes up to the rear. Side on view of the existing development. And the opposite direction coming down Frensham Road, looking back towards the rear of the property. So the key issues with this are the design and the impact on visual amenity and neighbouring amenity. The dwelling, as I've outlined before, would be identical to what has been previously approved on site. The designs considered and materials used are considered to be in keeping with the sort of the character of the area, taking on traditional materials in a contemporary way. It provides us adequate occupier amenities, doesn't significantly or detrimentally impact neighbouring amenities given its distances from surrounding development. And there's also safe access onto the highway, which would be retained. For those reasons, the application is recommended for approval, subject to the completion of appropriate legal agreement regarding SPA contributions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Right, public speaking on this one. We have a number of public speakers, including the ward councillors, both of them. Right, first one is Elizabeth Chart. And you have 4 minutes, Elizabeth, as you probably guessed by now, when you start speaking.
As you know, in 2021, the retrospective planning permission for the shipping container house, as we call it, at 17 Frensham Road was refused. It was built in flagrant breach of the 2017 planning permission. I'd be interested to know how often you get more than 180 objections to a single residential planning application. In November last year, the inspector dismissed the appeal due to significant, substantial and unacceptable harm. Then the enforcement notice for demolition was served in January and there was rejoicing all around the Bourne and it made front page news. The local residents want that building gone and justice seen to be done because the rest of us have to accept it if we don't get planning permission approved. Or we have to take down a garden fence because an enforcement officer says it's too high or in the wrong place. I put it to you that the owner wants to do absolutely anything to prevent having to comply with the enforcement, and he wants to keep the building at all costs. These planning applications are just a ruse to convince the council to lift the enforcement notice, and local people believe the enforcement notice must remain in place at all costs. So please do not approve the 2017 rebuild if there is the slightest danger of the enforcement notice being lifted. Please don't assume that the work will be starting anytime soon, so the building will be demolished anyway. Local people do not trust the owner, and we know he ignores all letters, all site visits. He would ignore any conditions imposed, and the building will stay there. It's a very expensive scheme with all the engineering work required to dig into the hillside. So don't be surprised if a raft of amendments to the permission come flying in if this version is approved. It certainly won't look like you think it will look in the end. And we don't believe he has the money to pay for it either. Plus, you may have noticed on that the property asset has been neatly slid across into a new shell company called Templius on the Isle of Man. It has not been sold, and this is not a mortgage company. A single beneficial owner listed is another shell company on the Isle of Man. The principal owner is still the same person as before, and he obviously has something to hide. Templice was created in January this year, just days after the enforcement notice was served. If permission is granted for either scheme, then it will lend weight to the appeal against the enforcement notice currently with the inspector. The appeal grounds are that the planning permission ought to be granted or that demolition is excessive. Let's not give the appeal any support. I hope you can feel the tension and frustration which residents have been living with for so long. We felt we were nearly there. I know there were so many new members on the committee here for your first meeting, and I know the agenda is overwhelming, but please don't allow an inadvertent technicality. Let this applicant off the hook and encourage other unscrupulous developers to play the system and take us for fools. Please don't regret giving the applicant the benefit of the doubt and end up driving up the Frensham Road in 3 years' time or 5 years' time and seeing the same building sitting there as a monument to the failings of the planning system and the victory of antisocial arrogance and self-interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, very passionate speech to say the least. I'd like to remind members in the debate, they must not make any reference to the applicant as has been done by what we can do so. Right, the next speaker is, I believe, Michael Connolly. Michael, it's a long time since we've seen you.
Vice versa, and it's been to my detriment.
You have 4 minutes, Michael, until on this item. 4 minutes. That's
Good evening. I act for the mortgagees who are Templius. They are the funders for the applicant who was Peter Strange originally. They have taken over the project as he has run out of money, and he will not make any money out of this at all. But I can assure you that the people who provided the mortgage do have enough financial backing to be able to sort out what is, and I agree, a very unfortunate mess. I'm only going to deal with the issues which have been raised by the first objector. And number one, I can actually say that some applications, if they're right, have been approved in this borough where there have been 460 objections. It's not the number of objections, it's whether what is proposed is right or not. I agree, the existing building in its current form is not what we want. I'm a resident in the area, and it should be either removed or adapted tremendously. This application is for its removal and its replacement with the 2017 consent. The 2017 consent was considered to be an attractive building and was granted locally. And one of the offers even suggested, and I hoped it would be, that if it's built in accordance with my original plans, that we might be put forward for an award. Unfortunately, it was sold on, and that didn't happen, and now we're in this mess. However, what I can say is that if the original building is built and this is demolished, which will happen through this application, we will have an attractive building on site, appropriately designed and formed from appropriate materials, which are just right for this sylvan setting. I would like to say that if the planning department actually want to put some conditions relating to the time period for demolition to deal with the concerns of the councillor, the applicant would be happy on the basis these are reasonably easy to achieve, so that we can actually ensure that driving down the road in 2 or 3 years' time, you don't have a situation where that building is still there, and the applicant is willing to agree this, and it's something we could agree with the officer, or could be discussed after I've given my views. I don't have any other items to raise, as I've just dealt with solely the aspects of the objectors' concerns. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, so we have both ward councillors who wish to speak on this item, understandably, I think. Right, Councillor Murray and Councillor Coe, who wishes to go first? Councillor Murray, 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for allowing me to speak at this meeting, and congratulations on your appointment. And I wish the new committee every success in the new format, and hopefully decisions can be made speedily and effectively. I would like to speak on the applications at 17 Frensham Road, Farnham, as it is in my ward and I am familiar with the building. I'm a newly elected councillor and no planning expert, unlike my experienced co-councillor for the ward, Councillor Coburn. I have, however, sat on planning meetings at Farnham Town Council, and I have read the applications carefully. I come at this as a local resident who is sitting in the pub, talking to his mates. But to be more specific, sitting in the Fox pub, which, as you may or may not know, is situated directly opposite the house in question. Over the years, we've seen this building from the pub garden and thought, how did they get permission to build that? One of my mates exclaims he cannot build an extra floor on his garage, but they can build this. I don't know how they came up with the idea to build the house there, but perhaps they were also sitting in the same pub garden and came up with what they thought was a brilliant plan. The long and tortuous process to get where we are at this moment in time is almost Shakespearean in its folly, and it seems like a comedy of errors. The planning of the house is granted, but they build it in the wrong place, larger than what was agreed, and with the wrong materials. They then ask for retrospective permission to allow it. This is then refused. They are then given an enforcement order to demolish the building because the inspector has said that it cannot be changed enough to comply with the original planning permission. This is currently awaiting a decision from the planning inspectorate on the appealed enforcement notice. Now, we have two applications, one to demolish and make it a bit smaller, and one to maintain the building and make it a lot smaller. Now, to me, it seems that if these applications are granted before the enforcement appeal decision is made, then you could argue that the appeal will be successful, as you've already agreed that the building can be amended against the original advice that it could not be. Now, I know planning is complicated. Everybody tells me it is. But this doesn't make any sense. To continue my Shakespearean analogy, this is not a comedy, but a tragedy for all involved. I would imagine there is a big financial and emotional cost for them. But planning should be about rules and policy, and there is a price to pay for not complying with them. It needs to be fair, and also it needs to be seen to be fair. Chairman, I would ask the committee to defer the applications until after the enforcement appeal. Thank you.
Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Chairman. I was around in 2017 and I agreed that this building that was given permission in 2017 could sit on that plot. I worked with a young officer at the time. And in fact, we had a deal. We were going to meet in the Fox pub that my fellow councillors went a year into the planning application to have a look and see how well it was sitting in its plot. But within days of the permission being granted, my phone never stopped ringing. Councillor Bishon, the late Councillor Bishon, many of you remember him. He and I were inundated with the public comments because what was being built was plainly nothing like what was being given permission for. Now, I did not start off being skeptical on this site. I was all for that building in 2017, but I have spent 5 years trying to get a solution for that site. And if I don't trust the applicants at the moment, you'll have to forgive me and Mrs. Chart, but we have been told so many lies over those 5 or 6 years. When they came in for the amendments, and there are a lot of amendments to the building, they never said they wouldn't comply with the original. They said they couldn't comply with the original. And that's why they were building something different. So what's changed? If we give them permission for something they couldn't build before, because it's technically very difficult, not only will it be expensive, the engineering work will be expensive, but also to get it as we wanted it, nestling back into the hillside, unlike the one that we've got, is going to, again, need a lot of work. So what we have on site was a building that we tried as an authority to work with the owners when we saw it wasn't going according to plan. We did, as I say, do several amendments, and then towards the end, it just went berserk. All of a sudden, we had a door on the first floor and no access to it without a trampoline or something. So they built this absolutely hideous concrete staircase. It's there, it's on that sort of, what do you call those things where you look and see a segment of them. It is absolutely hideous. Not only that, they put fencing all around, which they didn't have approval for. And at the back of the building, where there was meant to be no amenity space, just nestling in, they put in some amenity space, damaging the trees and fencing off this amenity space. If I believed that by granting this first application, that we would actually end up with what we thought we were going to end up with, then I would support it, but I don't, and I can't. I was at the appeal in 2022, when the inspector was very, very clear, and he said to the officers, you know, what's acceptable? And basically they said, what's there is just unacceptable on all levels. And it worries me looking at some of those sections that it looks to me as though you've still got a high bit near the road. And that was never the idea when we put the first permission through. So I would have a look at that. So I'm with my fellow councillor here. We've got enforcement out on that. And the champagne was flowing in the Bourne when that happened. 5, 6 years into the saga, we actually had a solution. The inspector said that it was not acceptable, and we put out the enforcement notice very soon afterwards. Leave it at that. Let that enforcement notice go through the process, and then perhaps give them permission for something else. The inspector said more than once that what was given permission for in 2017 was not the only acceptable solution on this site. So I think you're rushing the process. I would get the demolition done and then see if we can get something good on this site. Carbuncle, containers, you name it, monstrosity, everyone calls it something different.
Okay. Any other councillor wish to speak on this item? Silence. McLeod, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my view on this is very simple. We should be listening to the views of the local councillors, Councillor Coburn and Councillor Murray, and accept their recommendation that we defer this until we hear the result of the appeal. If I'm understanding that correctly, whatever they're suggesting, we should be agreeing to.
Councillor Rubini?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I don't know the history of this except what I read here and my fellow councillors tell me. I do find it difficult, however, that we take the character of the owner or the applicant into consideration. After all, I'm not certain that is a planning consideration. We're here to look at black and white lines, etc., and to approve or disapprove a plan. So yes, I'm finding it difficult to decide in my own mind, do we look at the application and say this is the application? Because I, like everybody else, am saying what we want is the house built that was in 2017. So what we're talking about tonight is a way of getting there. And yes, I've heard suggestions about let it go on and then wait until it's knocked down and then get this other house in. But that isn't the application in front of us. So my problem is, do I want to support what we have here, i.e. we want a house on there that was approved in 2017, or do we wait further? So my initial reaction is that I would like to approve this, providing, of course, we don't have to put another enforcement later on to actually get back to where we are now. So we'd have delayed it by quite a time. But in theory, I'm approving this simply because I want that 2017 design that was approved built.
Thank you. Claire, you want to speak?
Yeah, members, I think it might be helpful if I just just talk to you about the enforcement notice and where we are with that, because I think it is important that that's fully understood. So the enforcement notice was served in early January, and as we've heard, there was much celebration, but there is an appeal that's been lodged against that enforcement notice. Now, the inspectorate are aware of these applications and they think it's reasonable for them to wait for us to confirm the outcome of these applications because they are material to the appeal. So if I just talk you through this application alone, because we'll go on to the next one and have a similar or linked discussion. So members, this evening, you've got an enforcement notice that's in place that requires the removal of this unauthorised dwelling, together with various other activities or engineering operations that have taken place without planning permission on that site. And it would be not unreasonable for you to look at the application you've got before you, which is exactly the same as, we are saying it's exactly the same. You need to make that judgment as the permission that was granted in 2017. If you do that, then the enforcement notice still stands. So you've still got a live enforcement notice. The inspectorate isn't going to change that notice because it's not within his gift to change the notice. You know, he can't wipe the notice out completely unless he feels that the notice wasn't properly served. So the notice still stands, and the permission, if the application is granted permission, then we would tell the inspectorate there is a permission in place, but the notice would still exist. The reason why the inspectorate is wanting to sort of pause to await the outcome of these appeals is more related to the second application. But I need to talk to you about the second application, I think, now to give you the full context of it. Otherwise, you're sort of semi-blind going into this decision. So with the second application, it's within the inspectorate's power to actually slightly vary a notice. And you'll know that the second application basically seeks to keep the bottom of the building and somehow slice the top off. Now, I think we need to, be fully understanding how the top actually gets sliced off, and it may be that the notice has to be changed a little bit more. But what the inspectorate is minded to consider, if the second application was to be granted permission, to vary the notice to enable that second permission to be implementable. Now, we haven't submitted our statement yet, and it might be during the life of the appeal that we turn around to the inspectorate and say, we don't think technically you can vary the notice in that way, but we haven't got to that point yet. So from the council's point of view, you've got 2 applications. We've got a notice that we've served because we feel that is the right action to take. But we've been invited to consider 2 planning applications, and I won't say whether we had invited them ourselves or whether they invited themselves to be submitted to us. But nevertheless, they're in front of us. So, you know, we've got to consider them. So we'll have the discussion again on the next application because we need to, because it's a different application and has quite different implications. But for the purpose of this application, sort of members need to be conscious in their decision making that this is to just effectively renew the permission that they had, and that the notice would still stand. So if the inspector upholds a notice, then what's been built has to be removed. If he doesn't uphold the notice for some technical reason, then we just reserve it and would go through the same process again of getting it removed. But the decision has been made already in the serving of that notice that the building on site today is going because it is unacceptable. So if that's helpful to just clear up what is quite a confusing situation for anybody, even for planning, you know, we've had to walk this through very carefully and with the legal team, and I'm sure we'll have lots of other discussions about this because of the sort of overlap with the appeal and then 2 applications. But hopefully that gives you some clarity in your minds of the notice versus this application, and then the next application that you haven't yet considered on the agenda.
Councillor Austin.
Thank you, and I take on board the comments you've just made. I just, you didn't mention essentially this was a renewal. Well, just to clarify, it's not a renewal, it's a new application. There is no extant planning permission in place, and therefore we should be looking at this on its own merits with no regard to any previous planning application. Personally, I understand that I'm minded to see the enforcement notice and process take effect, and then delay a decision on this until after that point. Thank you.
Any other councillor wish to speak? Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. No, I'm a little more confused than I was a few moments ago, because in the conditions that you have in this application, there are various things, I think condition 4, condition 5, which said no work or demolition shall be undertaken until other actions are taken. I think an arboricultural report and so forth. So my concern is if we were to approve this, that there could be delays in the submission of these other applications, which would in turn lead to a delay in the actual demolition, which is the sense I get that most of us want to see happen. So on that grounds, I'm probably more inclined to wait for the enforcement and insist on that rather than approving the application. Thank you.
Okay, any others? I mean, I'm getting the drift, and there's someone proposed a motion that they want to defer this decision. Does anyone want to move that as a motion? No? Yes. Councillor McLeod,
if I could come back, Mr. Chairman, I'm a little bit confused because we seem to be in the position where our councillors are advising us that we should wait until the result of the appeal. But we're told by the officers that the inspector is not going to take the appeal until he hears this decision. So we've got a sort of impasse, really. Each side is waiting for the other, and that confuses me. And in that sense, I would be inclined to move a motion that we do defer this application and throw it back into the hands of the inspector to make up, because the inspector, well, all we know should be upholding the council's decision to make sure the applicant complies what he's supposed to be doing. Thank you, Chairman. I may be further confusing things. That's my current suggestion.
No, That's correct. The inspectorate are aware of the application, so they've deferred making that. If the decision is to defer an application indefinitely, then obviously the applicant will have a right of appeal against non-determination, and the inspector will have to proceed to make to determine the appeal on the enforcement notice.
So may I, is your advice, is it dangerous for us to actually defer this and throw it all back into the inspector's court?
So in my view, you're probably delaying achieving the outcome you want, because the applicant has a value in the site that they probably need to realise, hence the application, which is a resubmission of the application that was granted in 2017. In terms of materiality, then there has been a local plan adopted since that time, but that doesn't alter the recommendation we're making this evening. So I suspect if we defer, we're probably prolonging a point where we get the outcome we want. And I'm assuming the outcome that we generally want is we've granted a permission in 2017. That will be a significant material consideration in any decision or any appeal. And I think in deferring, you're potentially just putting another process in place that will cause further delay in actually achieving the outcome. I think we collectively want to get the building removed, accepting that we've granted a permission, and you know that permission in its new life would be implemented.
Thank you. Oh, what a complex world this is. Mr. Connolly, I think we all agree we want this building gone, don't we? Basically, Mr. Connolly made the offer, I think. Well, I'm not sure he did the offer or not, but he said, yes, he's quite happy to see a condition in this place that we should demolish. No, we can't do that.
No, we can't demolish buildings that shouldn't be there by way of condition. That's why we served an enforcement notice. So I note the comment about the demolition in the wording, and I think that wording needs to be, that's standard wording. That wording just needs to, that demolition reference needs to come out of the condition. Should members be minded to, not reminded to approve, sorry. I might be doing that as well, minded to approve.
Councillor Rivers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is one of the more complicated applications that I've ever come across, but if I understand it correctly, that what we see in front of us in this application has been approved by a Waverley committee in 2017. Therefore, they didn't see any reasons to object to that, and we probably wouldn't either. And I echo the point that Councillor Rabini made. This is the application we have in front of us, and we should either agree it or not agree it tonight.
Any other councillor wish to speak? Right, I'm going back to the ward councillors now. Who wants to go first? Councillor Coburn or Councillor Coburn? Or Councillor Murray?
I'll go first this time. Yes, I mean, I can understand all the arguments, but I have to say, being a local ward councillor, having lived with this, having seen what happened when we gave permission for 2017, which never even took off, left the ground, and having listened to the inspector, who said very clearly twice in his report, I don't know how many times at the hearing, that basically the 2017 permission was not the only thing that will be acceptable on this site. There is no permission actually associated with this site at the moment. There is no permission at all. There's no permission for 2017. There's no permission for what's being built. The site has no planning permission attached to it. And what I am saying is, unless we can, and I think we've just been told we can't, enforce demolition, I have a vision of this thing going another 3 years down the road, like we've had all the time. Every time when we get near to a conclusion, they whack in another planning application, or, this has just gone on and on and on for so long. This is really, the permission was granted in 2017. We expected it to be built out by 2019, 2018, 2019, and it was never even started. If they had attempted to build the 2017 out and failed and come in and said we can't do it, I wouldn't be as sceptical as I am now that what's going to happen on that site is whatever we give them permission for, it will not necessarily be full demolition and then a full implementation of the existing 2017. Well, it's not existing, it's not extant. So my problem is belt and braces here. I want the outcome to be that that house is demolished. I don't have any preconceptions about what should be in its place. There may be the 2017 type, maybe something totally different, but I want the certainty that that building will be demolished. And if we can't do that by planning permission and planning, if we can only do in planning permission, well, you've got 3 years to get on with it. If that is the maximum power we have, then I think we are letting down our residents who have lived with this. Our residents spend hours, George now knows this because he's part of it, beautifying the Bourne. We plant things, we scrub things, we litter pick, we do everything. And we have to do it in the shadow of this carbuncle, which has been allowed. And residents say the whole time, as Mrs. Chart said, how on earth did Waverley let this, get past them? So all I'm asking for this is absolute certainty that if planning permission were granted, that the demolition would occur. And if we cannot get that absolute certainty, unless it goes totally through the inspectorate, then I think we should refuse permission. I know they'll go to appeal, but then let's face it, they've spent all this 5 or 6 years taking us to appeal. They're just playing the system for all it's worth. And the people that are suffering are the local residents of the Bourne. Thank you.
Claire?
Yeah, just to be clear, because maybe this is really complicated and maybe I'm not being clear in the advice I'm giving you. The only way you can,
No, don't worry.
I don't think I only get 4 minutes.
Mhm.
The only way you can secure demolition of this dwelling is through the enforcement notice. And for the reasons that you've expressed, because we can't, if we granted a planning permission, we don't know it's going to be implemented. So we can't put a condition on to try and secure its removal because they won't implement it, will they? So the enforcement notice is there. That's your mechanism for securing removal. If they fail to comply with the notice, the next step is a prosecution based on the enforcement notice. If they fail to then do that, the last step is the council going in themselves and taking direct action to remove the building and then putting a charge on the land or seeking to recover the cost of doing that from the owner of the land or owners of the land. That's the route. So I hope that's clear that the enforcement notice that we've already served is the route for securing removal of the building.
I'm sure Mr. Connolly's listening to this with great. Yeah. Anybody else wish to speak on this item? No. 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 Boyd, do you want to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've listened to it. It's been, as you're right, it's very complicated. I knew it would be. But what I just want to clarify is if we wait for the inspector's decision to dismiss the appeal, which the applicant has applied to not demolish his building, their building, sorry. If we approve this planning permission, which is demolish and rebuild, will that have an impact on that decision or not? Or if we have to say, no, we dismiss and refuse this application, not the second one, but the first one. So we have to refuse this one and we have to just let the appeal process run its course until that inspectorate has appealed. That's what I'm not 100% sure, sorry.
Okay, so I'll try and advise on this, but I'm going to be a little bit careful in what I say because so we've got an enforcement notice. If we do nothing with this application and let the applicant appeal against non-determination, which I think is the route that would go down, a deferral tonight, I think, given the situation that is happening on this site, I suspect that we'd have the enforcement appeal that would run, and at some point there would be an appeal on this application. So the enforcement notice would run, and if that notice is upheld, there would be 12 months to comply with the notice. So you'd have 12 months to demolish. If the timing was poor and there was still a live appeal for the non-determination of the application you've got this evening, then they probably wouldn't comply with the notice because they wouldn't demolish something of some value to them and not be able to build anything else, because why would you? We would then have just said our next step would be to prosecute against the enforcement notice. But if we'd had a live appeal going on for that, we would not particularly be, you don't tend to go to a prosecution if you've got a live appeal, because it's not generally looked at very favourably in the court. So that would sort of potentially give us a sort of another decision route that's still going on that could cause delay and then going to prosecute for non-compliance against a notice if that's what they end up doing. Now that's all speculation, because I don't know, you know, the notice, they might demolish it in 3 weeks' time and start rebuilding. But, you know, that's the way the planning system works, and the opportunity maybe for extending those time periods that exists with enforcement notices, appeals, prosecutions, all potentially running in parallel. Now, I know that's probably not really helpful to you because it's sort of another dynamic I've just thrown into the mix. But, you know, you're asking me for that advice, so I'm giving you that advice.
Councillor Sullivan.
Sorry, yes, just a quick one. If the applicant's owners want to go back, obviously, to the original design, why haven't they demolished the site and the property already?
So I'm a planning officer advising you on planning matters. I'm not involved in people's personal lives, financial lives, or anything else. So I really cannot answer that question for you. I can't say why they haven't. I think you can probably join. I can't tell you why they haven't demolished it. But, you know, I mean, I think you can probably draw some of your own conclusions from what has already happened on the site.
Lewis wants to speak. Lewis.
Thank you, Chairman. Understandably, much of the discussion has been relating to the enforcement action and the status of the enforcement appeal. And I think it's right for that discussion to have taken place. I just want to remind members that before making a decision on the application, if members were minded to refuse tonight, I think it's helpful to remind you that you would need to do so on planning grounds. You would therefore need to identify conflicts with the development plan, NPPF, national policy, and rely on sound reasons for refusing it, so that we could defend our position at any future appeal. I'm not convinced that refusing it solely on or even at all on grounds relating to this ongoing enforcement action would be appropriate. It arguably would be more appropriate to defer the item if that was the paramount concern of the committee.
Does anybody you want to speak, Councillor Austin?
I suppose the thing I really want to understand is, if planning permission is granted for this scheme, will that have any impact at all on the enforcement appeal?
We'll answer the question, I hope.
So no, it won't, because the notice is the notice. So the permission would just enable them to demolish and build something, but the notice requires them to simply demolish.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Austin? Yes, Councillor MacLeod.
Just a final comment, Mr. Chairman. I absolutely hate this, but I have to say that the officers have convinced me that we should be going along with their recommendation and granting this application. Thank you, particularly what the legal officer said at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to put the recommendation then, friends. Oh, councillors, the recommendation is that subject to, that subject to the completion of appropriate legal agreement to secure the financial contribution to, oh, I got the wrong one there. Dear me. Sorry, apologies. Subject to the completion of an appropriate legal agreement to secure the financial contributions towards the ongoing maintenance and enhancement of the Farnham Park, also, and subject to conditions that planning permission be granted. And recommendation B, that in the event that a section 1 is not completed within 6 months of the date of the resolution to grant permission be refused. And just amend the conditions as already outlined by Claire. Those in favour, please raise their hand. Those against? Can't go on. And abstain? Result.
Councillor, oh, you can't vote. That's all right. That's why my numbers are out. Apologies, Councillor Coburn. Thank you, Chair. So that's 11 in favour, 2 against and no abstentions.
Well, the application is granted, but I'm sure Mr. Connolly has heard the how unhappy with the committee is at the moment. But there we are. Right, we'll move on to the next one, which is a variation, of course, which is WA 2023-00123, land known as 17 Benjamin Road, Lowerbourne, Farnham, D988F, part demolition of the existing authorised structure, and with alterations to form a dwelling. Dylan, again.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is for the part demolition of the existing unauthorised structure with alterations to the property to form a dwelling. As previously outlined, the planning permission was previously granted for a dwelling. However, it was not built in accordance with the approved plans or conditions of that permission, and the permission was not lawfully implemented and has since expired. The applicant sought to remedy this with an application for what has been constructed on site, and this application was refused and dismissed at appeal in November 2022. A key thing to understand is the inspector's appeal decision, which outlined that it is possible for a contemporary dwelling to be acceptable and successful on this site, and the 2017 permission achieved that. The inspector did go on to say in their decision notice that the 2017 permission has established the principle of residential development on the site, as well as its form, height, scale, appearance, and design ethos of an acceptable form of such development. It's also important to highlight that the inspector stated that it was agreed at the hearing that the 2017 permission does not represent the only form of development that is acceptable on the site. In summary, in relation to the appeal proposal, the inspector found that the combination of materials of the currently constructed development, its siting, and its overall height of the development added to the visual prominence and dominance and dismissed the appeal. This application seeks planning permission for the removal of the entire top story of the existing unauthorised dwelling, alterations to the size and positioning of the windows and doors, alterations to the elevations to comprise a different palette of materials, which would include the dark vertical oak boarding and stone, and removal of the existing staircase to the front of the property. The outline here shows the location of the 2017 approval, and the property here is the proposed application. You can see here the steps have been removed that lead to the upper ground floor, and the area would be soft landscaped. So this proposal is a section of the site as seen from Frensham Road. This is the application site property. The blue dash indicates the as-built development and would be removed as part of this application in its entirety, which results in the proposed dwelling sited here. So the next slide, similar to the previous one, it is the section as seen from Frensham Road. You've got the proposed dwelling here with the removal of the top floor. And in red here is the outline of the originally approved scheme in 2017. So you can see that it sits further back into the site at a higher land level than what is being currently proposed. What is being proposed is 2.87 meters lower. I'll just go back 2.87 meters lower than what is currently on site. And the proposal would be 1.24 meters lower than the original permitted scheme further back into the site, subject to the removal of the top floor. What we have here is the front elevation of the property as proposed. Access on this lower ground floor here and parking to the front. You can see the faint outline here, which indicates the top floor to be removed in its entirety. Here's the proposed rear elevation. You can see it's a low profile, sitting lower in the landscape than the existing property to be removed. So the west elevation, similar to the previous street scene elevation, proposed top floor to be removed. The existing steps, external steps leading up to the first floor of the property also to be removed. And the east elevation showing the same thing. So this next slide are the proposed elevations overlaid with the originally approved elevations. So although it was sited further back into the site, this overlay has been put together to show you side by side at the approved and proposed levels, the differences between what has been approved in 2017 compared to what's being proposed now. You can see that the original approval sat higher in the site by approximately 1.24 meters. So although it had a closer relationship with the land sloping upwards, it did sit higher in the landscape. So the proposed ground floor plan steps internally leading up to the next floor of the property, and you've got a study / bedroom and a utility storage space and a loo. And then the proposed first floor. So unlike the previously approved scheme, there's a lower ground floor and a first floor rather than 3 floors. You've got the front elevation here from Steam Farm Close. You can here see the top floor here proposed to be removed, and you'd be left with the elevation seen here that you'd be able to see from this location. This elevation would be clad in the vertical dark oak cladding with stone to the ground floor, which isn't visible from this location. Further east along Steam Farm Close, again, the existing dwelling and top floor removed, and you would see partly obscured floor clad in those darker materials to allow it to blend in with its surrounding environment. Similar elevation here. Close elevation, and so this element removed, and this section of the property clad in the dark oak cladding, steps to be removed and landscaped, and the ground floor element would be stone. Again, to the rear, only part of the elevation that would be visible there to be retained. So this is a verified visual image as part of the 2017 application. Here you've got what was originally approved in the dark timber cladding as part of the submitted 2017 application. And what we have is this, I'm trying to see right there it is. What we have here is this dashed line, which indicates the proposed development we have in front of us. So where the dwelling is sited further forward in the application site, but it is at a lower land level. It will be clad in a similar material to what's seen in this visual image of the original permission. Below is what we have on the site currently. The top floor would be removed, and we have a dashed line here to indicate what would be retained below. That would be clad in the timber cladding and would actually be less visible from this location, given its siting further down the site than what we can see here, given the vegetation between the application site and where the photo has been taken from. Finally, I thought it would be important to draw the attention to what was submitted as part of the appeal. So this is the amended scheme submitted at appeal. This application was not considered by the planning inspector. He considered the application as it was submitted at the time to the planning authority that had been appropriately consulted on to residents and consultees, and was not a determining factor in the application. But as you can see, what was presented was a slightly reduced scheme with the top floor element removed here. And what was being proposed to be retained was this section here, which now is being proposed to be removed. It's worth clarifying. So although the building has been moved forward in the site from where it was initially proposed, the proposal would result in the removal of the top floor. It would be smaller than the permitted development, originally permitted development, now lapsed in overall volume, lower in terms of its height, and the same footprint as what was previously approved. It will be clad in dark materials similar to the original approval. It would include the removal of the external staircase, and it's considered that these amendments would help the dwelling integrate and appear less visually prominent in the area and would not lead to any greater landscape harm or visual impact over and above the previous permitted scheme. Given the significant distance from neighbouring properties, the proposed development wouldn't result in harm to residential amenities of the neighbouring properties in terms of any overbearing impact, loss of privacy, daylight or sunlight. Adequate parking and safe access is provided. And for the reasons set out, the application is recommended for approval, subject to compliance with the appropriate legal agreement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dylan. Right, public speaking again. Elizabeth Chart, would you speak? You do.
So the main thing to point out is, again, harping back to the enforcement, is that what is the guarantee of a timescale if there is no enforcement for complete demolition? That's just the big question, isn't it? So if it relies on a condition and the enforcement drops, because you can't keep an enforcement notice for complete demolition if you're keeping half of the building. And that's why we don't trust that the planning on its own will deliver the building that you see in front of you in any time scale. Another point is you have got to expect that they will come back with amendments. And it's interesting that you put that amended scheme up, because I wouldn't mind betting that once, if you approved what's there, they're going to come back and just try and say, oh, how about the bit at the end? How about keeping that on? The other point is the amenity space at the back is at the same level as the top floor. And although the top floor is coming off, the amenity space, that level area at the back, is still at the height of the top floor. There's no way, I don't think, that you can say, oh, you can't put a fence around that, in which case the height will be higher and it will go back up pretty much to the effect that it had previously. So yes, it's a shame in a way with my environmental hat on, yes. Wouldn't it be nice if we could say, yeah, the guy is going to come on site in January, in line with the 12 months of enforcement, and set to work and take the top off that building. But we know that that is highly unlikely. So I'm afraid the best thing you can do is refuse this application and just rely on the fact that they will go demolish the whole thing and we'll end up with the 2017 scheme, which is the least worst option. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Another visit, Michael Connolly again. Michael? Yes, well, I think you're getting the mood of the meeting, Mr. Connolly.
Good evening. Can I just, by way of introduction, say that I completely understand the frustration. We've had the frustration in our office. We hate this scheme. It's not the scheme we designed. It's a scheme which was designed by somebody else, but we're trying to sort it out. And the one thing you should be aware of, the developer and his professional team are no longer involved in this. We are actually appointed by the funder. He had nothing to do with the setting out of the building, the change in the design. He just gave the money to the developer in good faith, thinking he'd make a profit. He has not made a profit. He's over £1 million in loss. So don't think he's walking away from this with a smile. He's not. This and the consent you just granted are least worst options. He will not be able to get his money back. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And we've been appointed to try and sort out the mess, which hopefully we will resolve tonight. Couple of items which I need to just mention, which have been raised. The amenity area. The amenity area is shown at a certain level on the application drawings. And if you consent it tonight, that will be the amenity level, not the amenity level which is currently there with the building to be demolished. So you have that assurance. The next item that needs to be considered is that the building before you now is 1.24 meters lower than the 2017 consent. It's smaller, and the only similarity is really that the design in appearance terms are similar, the materials are similar, but it is a smaller building. So in terms of getting the best outcome for the local authority, granting consent for this second application is the thing you should do. Now, somebody asked, why haven't they demolished it already? Well, clearly the developer who's had nothing to do with this mess, but had been trying to save some kind of money out of this, which is quite reasonable. He's still going to make a massive loss, but he can mitigate that loss just a little. If he retains the base of that building and carries out this application in this form, he doesn't need to demolish the whole building, only the top floor. That is why he hasn't done it. And you'll get a better result out of this one because it's smaller than if we implement the 2017 consent. It is a win-win situation, and it's one which I put before you, and it's one which will save the 21 people who work for me an awful lot of stress, because whenever this project is mentioned, everybody wants to run away from it and not be involved. That's why I'm here and nobody else is, because the buck stops with me. Thank you.
An interesting definition of win. But, yeah, all right. What councillors do you wish to speak on this again? George, or which one wants to go first, if at all?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I ask Mr. Connolly a question? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, of course. No, it's a technical question. How are you going to take the top off it easily? You know, is it something feasible? Obviously, you've looked at it. Is this something feasibly you can do straightforward?
It's straightforward. It's very quick. The top of the building is a timber frame, and if we do this, the whole process will be very quick. Implementing the 2017 consent, which has now just been consented, is a very much longer process. I think we'd probably be on site for 18 months to get that back up, whereas I think we could be 3 or 4 months by taking the top off, subject to there being pre-ordering before there's a start on site, but it would be that kind of process. I also understand, obviously, the developer who was involved initially will not be involved. The funder will have absolutely nothing to do with that same team. And he has been trying to track down the professionals involved and seek some kind of remuneration.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for allowing that. I just wanted to clarify that as a thing. Thank you.
By the way, members, I must stress again, in common debate, you must not make any reference, in fact, to anybody, in particular applicant, person applicants. Yes,
Yes, I do. Well, as far as I can see, but, you know, let us leave aside the inspector's report, planning, FMP8. Let's just tear it all up. You know, what's the point? We have got an inspector's report that says quite clearly that adapting that building, look at it, it's not possible. It's in the wrong place. It's 6 meters forward where it was given permission, and it's at an angle. I don't know what degrees, I've lost track. The original permission, the 2017 permission, was for the building to nestle into the hillside in line with what was then BE3, which is now FNP8. And it was going to nestle into that, and the amenity space would be around it, not at the back as it is now. Now, that building stands proud of the hill it was meant to nestle into. That is the difference. And that is why the inspector, read it, it's all in your papers. That is why the inspector said that it couldn't be made acceptable. In fact, he actually asked, and Mrs. Chop, she's still here, was there, the inspector actually asked the officers, could what is being put on this site be made acceptable? And because of the siting of this building, as well as the height and the other matters, no, it couldn't be made acceptable because it's in the wrong place on the site. The whole point was to have a building that nestled into the background. One time when you looked at this site, all it was green. It was just green. I mean, it was just trees. Some of the trees have been damaged, I'm told. Certainly some of them have disappeared. But what you've got with this site, because of where it is, because it's so close, that's what the inspector said. Now, if you don't think the inspector's report's worth adhering to, then I don't really know why we bother to sort of, you know, just turn something down, let it go to appeal and get a dismissal, because the inspector understood what we were trying to say about the character of the area and what we were trying to say about the well-wooded setting of this building. So I don't see how you can improve this enough to turn this into something that is going to be visually attractive and sits well in its site. You will always have, we've got the front view there, if you can see the back view, you can see the gap between the edge of the building and the wooded hillside, and that was never meant to be. You can just see a little bit of the fencing for the amenity space, which, as Mrs. Chart said, will be there anyway. So, you know, we're not going to gain anything from this. The inspector said it wasn't possible. The officers said it wasn't possible. The officer tonight will say it's not the same as the one that the appellant put in at the appeal. Of course not. But that wasn't what was looked at. The inspector looked at this and asked whether, given its siting and its proximity to the road, whether it could possibly be made acceptable. And the heritage officers and the conservation officer and Carl, who was representing and did really well at the hearing, said no. And, you know, we're just rolling over again. Oh, well, that was on November the 22nd. Heavens above, it's the 14th of June now. Let's change our minds completely. I mean, what are we supposed to be doing as a borough if it's not making consistent decisions that we can actually uphold and defend? So, you know, I just feel that he's got permission now to demolish, and, well, listening to Mr. Connolly, I'm not so sure that he's going to do that. I think he wants this one because it's cheaper, and he'll go out of his way to make sure that everything gets delayed until in the end we roll over and accept this one. I'm sorry, I just think we should go with the inspector.
And right, councillors, who wants to comment on this one? Anybody? Ooh, right. Nobody? I feel like it's like Devon Deep Blue Sea, this argument, isn't it? But you understand?
I think probably it is worth commenting, and just to say, I mean, this application is completely different from the application you just considered, because it is in a different site, it's a different proposal, and you need to make up your minds this evening whether or not this is the right development for this site. Obviously, the application you've just considered already had been granted a permission in the past, and therefore, you know, it was a different proposal. But you need to consider this evening whether retaining a building on the footprint of the existing in a slightly different form, but nevertheless in the same position on the site, would be an appropriate form of development for this site.
Any councillor wish to comment, or shall we move to the recommendation? No? Louise?
Yeah, sorry, just a little bit of clarification. As we've already passed the other one, if we pass this one, is there a conflict? I've lost a little bit as to why we're looking at both of them tonight, pass them both according to the officer recommendation.
Okay, so yes, there is a conflict in that you'd have 2 live permissions on the site, and the applicant could choose to implement either one. And similarly, you know, he could have submitted 10 applications on the site, and you'd have to consider all 10. And in theory, you could, if they were all acceptable in planning terms, you could grant 10 permissions. So if a permission is granted, then there's two permissions on the site, and the discussion with the inspectorate would be around how or if the notice can be modified to ensure that we remove the building as is. And that would be, you know, a discussion as part of the appeal on the notice. But, you know, the grant of one permission doesn't mean that you need to grant this one, because it is a completely different proposal, and you need to consider what's been put in front of you in this application on its merits, you know, for the reasons set out in the report.
Yes, councillor Austin.
Hi, I was just going to say that looking at this individual application on its merits, to me, it's a compromise. It's a really big compromise architecturally. And all the things which were appealing about the previous application are not there. They're not achieved in this application. It doesn't sit snugly into sight. It's at a different angle. It's all just a big compromise, and so for that reason, I'm not minded to go for this one. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak? No, you. Councillor.
Thank you very much. I'd like to agree those comments, really. I think we would need to look at this application as if we were seeing it for the first time. And if we were seeing it for the first time, would we approve it? And we may not.
Anybody else wish to speak? No. Oh, yes. Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. The officer's report makes reference to obviously the lowering of the height as one of the sort of considerable things that make it adhere to some of the policies. However, I'm finding quite compelling what Councillor Coburn said in her ward comments about this plan is still very much prouder than the original 2017 plan. And you know, in my view, that still has significant issues for various of the policies, including, I think, TD1 and DM1, where I find that difficult to reconcile those. And for those reasons, I'm inclined to reject this. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak? Oh,
thank you, Chairman. I agree with my colleague who's just spoken, actually. Seems to me we're either going to finish up with the original consented application or with this compromise application, which Councillor Coburn has suggested is not satisfactory and didn't satisfy comments from a previous inspector. So I would actually be inclined to refuse this application and hope that we finish up with the original consented application, which would be the best outcome altogether. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, now somebody else, I'm going to move to the recommendation. Recommendation A is that subject to the completion of an appropriate legal agreement to secure the financial contributions towards the ongoing maintenance and enhancement of farm and park and inspector conditions that planning permission be granted. And recommendation B that in the event of a section 1 is not completed within 6 months of the date of the resolution to grant permission be refused. Those in favour of granting this application, please raise their hand. Those against? Abstain?
Thank you, Chairman. The result is none in favour, 13 against and no abstentions. Therefore, the application is refused.
But can we perhaps just confirm, is there a move to refuse and the reason for refusal? I think the members have sort of fed back to me and to us that they feel that the development by virtue of its siting would create sort of an inappropriate form of development within the area, contrary to local plan policies and neighbourhood plan policies. There's also the impact on the Thames Basin Heath Special Protection Area. So my question, previously there was a reason for refusal relating to impact on the heritage assets. I don't think anybody has raised that as a reason for refusal. So I am taking then that the two reasons for refusal are as I've just summarised.
Are we happy with that? Agree? Happy with that? Yeah. No. Any proposal and a second there? Propose? Anybody wishes to propose? Councillor Rubini and a seconder. Okay. Vote on that? Yes. Yeah, but yes, of course we got. Yeah, those in favour of that refusal on the grounds of refusal, please raise a hand. Those against? Ah, one. You can't do that. Yes. You've already voted against Austin.
Just in the inspector's report, it refers to FMP8. Is that relevant as grounds for refusal?
Okay, I want to.
So in terms of the policies,
Yeah.
I've given you the general policies. I'm not going to specify every single policy in now, so we will pick up the relevant policies in the local plan, neighbourhood plan, and any MPPF policies that reflect the reasons why you're refusing.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for that.
So anybody against? Anybody wish to abstain?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to confirm Councillor Sullivan's vote for. Thank you. Therefore, Chairman, it's unanimous that 13 in favour, none against and no abstentions.
Right, it's 29. Does anyone? Oh, so yes, Councillor Rubini.
Any chance for comfort break?
Can I suggest a 5-minute comfort break and then we'll move on to the last applications. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So, sorry, Chairman, I've got to disappear, but could I ask, please, if the dais, the people on the dais could speak up a little bit at times, because it's very difficult to hear yourself and the head of planning and what they're saying. So if you could speak closer to the microphone or slightly louder, because I think people at home may have difficulty hearing as much as we do.
Yeah, all right, okay, I'm trying my best. Okay, yeah, okay, fine. Right, we move on. So missing somebody. Who's missing? Okay. Is that the last one? Oh, okay, come on. Hey, dear me, hey, dear me. Anyway, we've got everybody back anyway. Now, I am going to change the order of the agenda slightly because it makes more sense to do it this way. And the next application we hear is WA 2023-00323, the land at Pierpoint Farm, the Reeds Road, Frensham, GU10 3BS, an application 73A to vary condition 1 of WA 2015-19.
Thank you very much. So this application is an application to vary condition 1 of the original permission, WA 2015-1988, the approved plans to allow an alteration to the originally approved design. That 2015 permission was for the change of use of agricultural buildings on the site to B1A and B1C and B8, now superseded by the new use classes, along with erection of infill extensions and alterations following a demolition of lean-to structures. So it was various buildings on this site the permission related to. This application only relates to the approved plans for building C, which we have here. The original application was partly implemented. All other works to the other buildings as approved, and the change of use. Oh. Sorry, I hadn't realized the screen wasn't shared above my head. There we go. Thank you. So this is the application site here, approved in 2015 for the change of use and works to the existing agricultural structures. It included a listed building consent, which we'll move on to. This application relates solely to building C. The other buildings within the application site, the renovation works have been carried out and the change of use has occurred. So we're just discussing building C. It's remained vacant since the permission was granted and the renovations have yet to be carried out. So this permission seeks to vary just the approved plans for that to allow a more flexible usability of the building to attract tenants to actually occupy and use the spaces. The changes are listed in the proposal section of the report. They're quite lengthy to go into detail of each elevation, as well as the internal changes, which are covered by the listed building application up next. So we have the approved elevations and the proposed elevations here. You can see that the proposed doors would all be of a similar scale, with shutters included to each door to retain that barn-like appearance. Windows at first floor, there was some here and here, but they've been slightly enlarged, made more central to allow light into the upper floors of the properties, to allow the properties to appear more attractive to be let, but they would retain that agricultural appearance, and the existing shutters, when closed, would give that appearance. Approved and proposed elevations here. Again, you can see the proposed doors, double glazed for better thermal efficiency, larger window openings, and replacement and repair to the timber cladding on these elevations. So this elevation again stays more or less the same. There is this access here. So currently the existing building and the approved building, this door is to access the upstairs, and there's not another way to access that. this has been revised internally, which will be seen on the proposed plans to allow internal access of the upper floors. Again, no significant changes to this elevation. So you've got the approved cross section and the proposed cross sections. So internally, where what is proposed is the creation of a mezzanine floor to be used by the unit below. It would be one unit on the ground floor and the first floor, rather than separate units to the ground floor and first floor. This is issues around building regs. So if the units will be occupied by the ground floor and the first floor by one tenant, which results in the need for the building to be meet building regs for fireproofing between the floors, would no longer be needed. So you can see it on the approved and proposed floor plans here. So you've got the larger of the units here and here. Internal staircase proposed to allow access to the upstairs, which currently doesn't exist. The middle unit, which also has a first floor accessed via this external door, would be subdivided to provide units 2 and 3 to allow more flexible space for an additional tenant with upstairs access, and units 4A and 4B, again, subdivision of that unit. So the proposal doesn't result in any additional commercial floor space being created. Due to the mezzanine floor, there's actually a slight reduction where the mezzanine floor at the first floor is created here. There's no proposed change of use that's already been approved, and that will be implemented as part of this renovation of the building. The existing parking as originally approved would be utilised and is acceptable, as well as the originally approved access. So we've got the elevations of the building here. You can see that it is in quite a state of disrepair. So this application would allow it to be renovated and occupied and protect it in the long run for maintenance and repairs in the future. Officers have identified that there would be less than substantial harm, which is given great weight in the MPPF in the planning balance. But officers consider that it wouldn't be significantly detrimental to the building. It would ensure the listed building is brought back into a viable use, ensure its long-term repair and maintenance. Get more elevations here. For those reasons, the proposal is considered acceptable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Right, public speaking on this item. The first one is Danielle Dew. Danielle Dew.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee.
Right, you got 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Danielle Dew. I'm the Chief Exec of the Countryside Regeneration Trust, which is a nationwide charitable organisation formed in 1983. We restore tired and forgotten parts of the land and revitalise old and disused farming properties. Planning and listed building consent was first granted for the conversion of the buildings at Pierpont Farm in 1988. And since that time, we have funded the careful renovation of these important historic buildings. The site is now home to a variety of artisan businesses, which includes the manufacture of bespoke furniture, silversmiths, and cheese making using the milk from our dairy. The one building that is yet to be converted as part of the original consent is the grain store, which is arguably the most prominent in the complex, being the first one you come to when visiting the site. This building is now in a poor state of repair and represents the largest and most costly part of the overall project we are to tackle to date. We could carry on and convert the building under the original consent, but have instead decided to revisit the details of that conversion with the assistance of your officers. We consider the result to be an improved scheme in relation to the impact on the historic fabric of the building, but equally an improvement to the lettable floor space that will ensure the project is a financially realistic option. Ultimately, this is a business venture which has to make sense financially, and whilst we acknowledge the objections from third parties, our application is submitted in good faith in order to secure a viable use consistent with the conservation of the building.
In this regard, the proposals are consistent with the policies in the development plan and the guidance set out in the NPPF. It is proposed to use traditional materials such as hemp and lime rendered internal blockwork insulation and new insulation proposals to the roof and floors, for example, along with an improvement to the usable floor space. These alterations result in a more sustainable approach to creating a good EPC rating, better use of natural sunlight, better lettable areas, and a commitment to a low carbon, low impact conversion of the building in line with the core values of the Trust. Once converted, the building will be used for those types of artisan businesses that operate successfully in the other buildings at Pierpont Farm that cumulatively will class reputation for craft. We hope, therefore, that members will support the proposal, the officer's recommendation, and grant consent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, we also have the ward councillor, Councillor David Munro. Thank you for being so patient, Councillor Munro. You've got 4 minutes now and 4 minutes after you wish to speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I support this application. I agree fundamentally with what the Chief Executive of CRT says. I think that this will actually improve matters. However, I do understand the objections. There's seven objections, and the underlying reason, I think, for those objections that have been tabled, and also many people have spoken to me, is a quite deep suspicion of what's going on at this site. And there's been quite an unhappy saga of what has happened before. And I won't go into the details, but suffice to say, knowing the site and the people around it very well indeed for decades, I can understand the feelings. They fear that this is the thin end of the wedge. And application by application, that this site will be turned into something completely different from what the original benefactor intended. I don't think this application is the thin end of the wedge. I think it can be accepted as it stands, but I do understand. And the key surely is the conditions that are set out in this report, especially condition number 6, which says that there may be no operations at all on Sundays and bank holiday. And crucially, during the week plus Saturday, everything stops at 8 o'clock in the evening. And if that is going to be the case, then I think this is acceptable. But I would call upon Waverley's enforcement activity to make quite sure that what is granted is actually obeyed. Because as I said right at the start, there's a very great suspicion by many people that there might be some monkey business down the road. It's up to all of us, and I certainly include myself, to make quite sure there isn't. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Right. Councillors, anyone who wishes to speak on this item? Dean.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, looking at the state of those old buildings, I think anything that is done to renovate them and upgrade them can only be to the good. And certainly for all these artisans that need space for small businesses, I think it is a very good idea. I know that Councillor Munro is saying that the people are worried about what could happen into the future, but we can't discuss that. We are here now to discuss what we're going to agree on tonight. The conditions are there. And I'm sure that, you know, they will be watched very carefully. So I think this is a wonderful idea and I fully support it.
Any other councillor wish to speak? Right. Okay, right. Well, all I say is I'm aware of these concerns that have been expressed on this particular occasion, and I echo Councillor Munro's point that, you know, you've got to observe the conditions. And shall we move to the recommendation then? That subject to conditions, permission be granted. Those in favour, please raise a hand.
That's everybody in favour, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Right, we move on. Well, I mean, the next one is really technicality, I suppose. It says which is WA 2023-00313, land at Pier Point Farm, the Regional Frensham, application section 19 of the planning listed buildings and 1990, very condition 1 of WA 2015-1989, approved plans to allow alterations to design. I think we're all straight to the vote, can we? Is everybody happy to move straight to the vote? I mean, I'll ask Daniel, do you want to add anything, or does Councillor Munro wish to add anything? Anything, Councillor Munro?
Am I on, Chairman?
Yeah, if you want to be.
Right, yes. I oppose this application, Chairman. I think it is the wrong application for this particular site.
The presentation, Councillor Munro, then I'll come back to you. All right then.
So this application here is the variation of condition 1 of the listed building consent of the application just presented. So they go hand in hand with one another. So this is to vary condition 1 of the approved plans in relation to building C to allow those changes to go forward. The elevations that we've previously seen with the changes to the barn doors and the windows and the elevations. Again, this side, the change to the doors, windows and elevations. The external door, which would be retained, but there'll be an internal access to access the upstairs from the inside of Unit 1. And the external access can be used also. Minimal changes to this elevation. Again, the proposed sections that show the mezzanine, the mezzanines that are created. The proposed floor plans against the originally approved floor plans. The proposed first floor plans against the approved floor plans and the elevations. As advised, less substantial harm to the listed building has been identified in terms of proposal due to the proposed changes, which has given great weight in the planning balance, but this has been balanced against bringing the buildings back into a viable use and renovating them to a level that they could be occupied by future tenants, thus thus retaining the sort of the longevity for the future and protecting any sort of future repairs and maintenance that might be required. The key issue is the listed building. Thank you very much.
Right, okay. Apologies, I've confused people. I confused myself, I think. Right, okay. Does Daniel, do you wish to add anything first? Daniel?
No further comment. Thank you, Chairman.
And then Councillor Munro, do you wish to...
I was ahead of myself, Chairman. I was speaking to the application after this. I forgot about the listing stuff. I've got no further comment.
Everybody in favour, Chair?
Thank you very much. And it's granted. Okay, right. We move on to the last application tonight to be considered, which is WA 2022-02941. The land is Helen Arkle, dyslexic tender, Arkle Lane, Frensham, Farnham, GU 103BL. Erection of 3 detached dwellings with associated vehicle access, parking and garden space following demolition of already existing buildings and structures. And this time it's Tracy Farthing to present. Tracy.
Thank you, Chair. This application proposes the erection of 3 dwellings with associated vehicular access, parking, garden space, following the demolition of all the existing structures on the site. Members will have seen the written update, which makes a minor amendment to condition 4, which relates to tree protection. The application site lies within the green belt, outside of any defined settlement and within an AGLV.
It lies adjacent to, but not within a conservation area. The site is fairly contained by trees and woodland, does not feature in any particular street scene per se. The wider site features open grass fields with a couple of pockets of trees. These elements are outside the application boundary, but are proposed to be retained. The development would result in the demolition of the existing buildings on site, which are mixed use. The main Helen Arkle building, being a Class E, former D1 non-residential institution, but also pertinent to this application are these buildings to the west, known as Webster's Yard. Permission was granted under a certificate of lawfulness for the continued use of Webster's Yard for B8 use. And more recently, a 2021 application sought to change this B8 use to B1 use. This was approved but not implemented. These buildings show the extent of the current buildings on site, this being the main larger building on site, and a series of outbuildings, which some of which are ancillary to the main outbuilding of Helen Arkle, buildings 1 to 5, and buildings 6 to 10 are part of Webster's Yard. There has been tree felling on this site. It's acknowledged the tree officer has been subject to a review. An extensive TPO was placed on the site on the 28th of October 2022 to prevent further tree felling in the interest of public amenity. Amendments have been made to the scheme following an initial objection from the tree and landscape officer to increase the southern boundary buffer to 5 metres following tree removal, to provide for a more substantial planting scheme with future space for growth and moving the dwellings and driveway away from the root protection areas of the woodland. Surrey Wildlife Trust are also clear that felling has occurred on the site and have made recommendations based on this, requiring the developers to provide compensation for the tree loss and associated habitat loss, and the baseline being for this being prior to the clearance of the site undertaken in October 2022. The proposed new dwellings would be located mainly on parts of the site where development exists at present. The proposed dwellings have been designed in order to relate to and respect existing topography on the site. Plots 1 and 2 would provide two-story dwellings orientated on a largely north-south axis, with the fronts facing towards the southern boundary and the rear gardens extending to the north, but not beyond the extent of the existing hardstanding on site at present. Plot 3 would be sited on a west-east axis with the front facing forward, with the front facing towards the central area. Forward of plots 1 and 2, it would be single-story in form with accommodation in the roof space. Each dwelling would feature solar panels to the roofs and would provide accommodation exceeding nationally described space standards. Plot 1 has gable features on the frontage, a porch, chimney. Plot 2 features similar gabled elements on the front elevation, but also includes render and tile hanging. Plot 3 is of a lesser height than plots 1 and 2, to be constructed of brick and feature tile hanging. The roof is bulkier in its width, but the gable features on the front elevation break up the roof bulk and it also relates well to the other proposed dwellings. The closest residential properties lie to the south of the application site. 4 properties are set within a substantial building, with Holodene Cottage approximately outlined red in this image, being the closest in terms of built form to the application site. Holodene Lodge is outlined in blue on this image. This plan shows the separation distances between the existing neighbours and the proposed dwellings. Each one would accord to the residential extension guidance of 21 metres between facing windows. In this case, the shortest distance is 44 metres. Whilst I appreciate this image isn't very clear in terms of the sections, this drawing demonstrates that the increased ground levels, so plot 3 being the image at the top, it demonstrates that the increased ground levels at the existing Webster's Yard or the proposed plot 3 would not be significant to give rise to amenity issues. It demonstrates also that there's 62 metres between the closest windows of Hollowdean Lodge and plot 3. These are a series of images. These are at the front of the site. So the image on the right is the access road coming down adjacent to the band of trees. The extent of hard standing on the site at present. You can also appreciate from some of these photos the extent of tree felling and thinning of the boundary. These images are of the rear boundary. So there, as you can see, there is some of the existing vegetation that has been retained, but a lot has been removed along this part here. Boundary vegetation and screening is proposed with a buffer of 5 metres to ensure that the proposed trees can be well established and there's enough space for that future growth. These are pictures of the existing outbuildings that form Webster's Yard and the main Helen Arpel building. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Right, we're public sitting on this item. There's being Natalie Williams, and it's a written submission. You want to read out, Kim? Is that all right?
Thank you, Chairman. Members should have a copy of this representation as I printed them out for everybody, but I'll just read it out for you. It's from Natalie Williams, who's an objector. Firstly, thank you for the opportunity to submit my objection and apologies that I'm unable to attend in person. I, with my family, live at Hollowdean Lodge, which is the closest property to this proposed development. Unfortunately, within the information and drawings provided by the applicant, our home has been misnamed as Hollowdean Lodge, which is in fact the neighbouring property. Our garden borders the proposed development side on 2 sides. Our primary objections are that our privacy will be destroyed by the nature of this development. There are concerns with plot 3, Webster's Yard. The house that is proposed to be built there will face directly into our garden and our home. It is on an elevated plot, which means that being able to see into each other's gardens and properties is unavoidable. Previously, we had a very dense line of trees and shrubbery which shielded us from the yard. We had no view of the current buildings. Sadly, due to the untimely removal of the trees in October 22, we now only have a pair of rather tatty leylandii that block any view. We understand there is a TPO across the entire site, but if these were to be felled, we would be left completely exposed. Our home, dating back from the 1830s, is 3 stories tall, and we have complete views of the site from all of our bedrooms. Currently, and despite the fencing that has been installed, we can see very clearly the roofs of the existing single-story building, the abandoned Land Rover and the old chicken coops. I do not understand how some hedging will protect and adequately shield us from the view of whatever is built. Plot 2 also remains a concern. Again, with the removal of trees and shrubbery in October, we were left with a relatively low hedge that does not afford much protection or shielding. The extent of the removal also included the cutting back of our boundary hedges, leaving parts missing and many gaps exposed. This now means that we can see through to the Arkle land. There is currently fencing in place, but we have had absolutely no representation from the applicant as to what or how they plan to adequately screen us from the new buildings. As it stands, we will be dominated from 2 sides of our garden. Previously, we could not see the Arkle Centre building, and now we have very clear views. What are the planting plans? Will there be trees, hedges, fencing, or something else? At what height will they be planted? How densely will they be planted? We have heard nothing. This also applies to the garden at Holodene Lodge. Even though this property has 30-foot tall Islandi hedging on their boundary, it has been cut back to such an extent that fencing is having to be put up to retain privacy. We are very concerned that our garden will become a goldfish bowl, with all 3 homes being able to see us clearly if they are built. I'm sure you can sympathise that in the space of a few months, we have gone from a completely private garden to one that is completely open. All in all, this development will constitute a significant loss of amenity in terms of privacy to our home. Another point that we raise objection to is that there is no need for another development within the village itself. The Farnham Society made a good point on their objection that there would be merit in using the existing building. Rather than building new housing, shouldn't we be looking at utilising what is already there? With climate change and the environment being at the forefront of many of our minds, should we not be looking to adapt what we have? I think that this would be much in keeping with Waverley's climate change and sustainability document. The village and the conservation area adjacent to development are something to be treasured and maintained. Not every single piece of land needs to be built upon to its maximum. There has already been significant damage to the natural landscape of this plot. There is a huge variety of wildlife that exists within this site, and how much more will be damaged in the pursuit of profit. One particular sadness is that there is a very little light pollution in this area. At night, it is incredibly dark. This is of such benefit to wildlife, and 3 homes will disrupt this immensely. Lastly, I hope that the egregious loss of trees on this site will be addressed by Waverley Borough Council at some point. It remains shocking that such a vast number, 25 by estimation, can be removed and there'll be no consequence. In the report by Headley Clark, commissioned by the applicant, it is said that the loss of trees has been used in an emotive way within objections. It is an inconvenient truth that in a rural area, the sudden felling of a large number of trees is and will be extremely emotive. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, the next speaker is Karen Clark. Is she? Karen Clark? Oh, we got Karen. I presume you realise you're 4 minutes when you start speaking, Karen.
Good evening and thank you, Chair. I'm here in support of the application. Policy is supportive of a residential use of this site. The scheme also falls within one of the exceptions of development permissible within this greenbelt location. It secures a reduction in both the footprint and volume of built form, as well as a substantial reduction in hard standing. Your officers have agreed the reduction in built form and spacious setting of the properties enhances the openness of the greenbelt. Several objections have been received from third parties and the parish about the impact of the proposal on neighbouring properties to the south. We also understand this is the reason the application was called before you this evening. During the application process, the siting of the properties was amended to provide a stronger landscape buffer along the southern boundary, which is now 5 metres in depth. As a consequence of this, even greater separation distances between the proposed units and those to the south has been achieved. As shown on the drawings and detailed in the report, the development increases the separation distances over and above those currently experienced between the Helen Arkle Centre and neighbouring properties. Furthermore, your committee report acknowledges all separation distances far exceed the guidance relied upon in your SPD. Plot 1 is set 6.4 metres further back than from the neighbouring properties than the existing building, increasing the separation distance to the nearest property to over 30 metres. Greater distance is achieved between the windows. Plot 2 is more than 38 metres, whilst plot 3 is over 60 metres away from the closest window. The recommendation includes a condition to secure supplementary and new landscape details, including new trees within the site and the planting mix within the 5 metre buffer along the southern boundary. The recommendation therefore gives the council control over the extent and type of planting within the site, addressing the outstanding concern from the adjacent property. The landscape condition, together with the existing boundary treatments and the strong separation distances, all ensure the proposal would cause no harm to the neighbouring properties by reason of visual impact or loss of privacy. A number of trees within the site were removed prior to the submission of the application. This was not pursued in breach of any TPO at the time. A request from a neighbouring property to actually reduce the height of the existing hedge along the southern boundary by 6 foot was not pursued. The applicants have worked with the council and their specialist officers to ensure all retained trees are protected and appropriate landscaping is achieved. This commitment continues with the agreement to the pre-commencement conditions set out before you. The applicant raises no objection to the council's TPA for the immediately adjacent 2.5 acres of dense woodland that they own to the west and south of the site. This gives a total of some 3.7 acres of protected woodland to the east, west and south, in addition to the protected avenue of trees along the driveway. The extent of retained and protected trees, together with the supplementary landscaping, ensure the site is well screened, the landscape character is protected, and it allows the development to assimilate into its setting. Ecological interests are protected with biodiversity net gain secured. Again, all of this is controlled and secured by way of condition. The design of the property is appropriate for the site and is based on traditional vernacular. Each property is individual in design and relies on complementary materials. The design is therefore sensitive and cohesive. The committee report provides a detailed assessment and demonstrates the proposal to be policy compliant in all respects. Planning legislation determines permission should be granted in such circumstances, with this presumption further endorsed by the tilted balance now demanded by the lack of 5-year housing land supply. We respectfully ask you to support the findings of the expert reports, consultee responses and the conclusions of your officers, and grant planning permission for these 3 well-designed properties which sit comfortably and without harm in this location. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. Councillor Munro, as ward councillor, your turn.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll try again. I think everybody understands that there can be some redevelopment on this site. That's common ground. It's surely a matter of judgment for the committee to decide, though, whether these 3 dwellings are excessive development in a green belt. And could I just draw your attention to policy DM14 of LPP2, it's our official policy, and it said, we have to assess whether a particular scheme would impact upon the openness of the green belt. And one of the clauses is, what about the scale, the mass, the height and volume of development? And to my mind, the key word there is height, because perhaps in a more suburban area, those 3 proposed dwellings would be acceptable. But especially plot 3 to the left, to the west, it sits on land which is much higher than the rest of the site. And neighbours have told me, and I've seen for myself, that it would indeed be very obtrusive, far more obtrusive in height than the buildings which already exist. The much loved Helen Arkell Centre does have buildings on that site, but they are much more attuned to the vernacular of the local area, and particularly the main centre itself is down in a little hollow, and so it is not obtrusive. It fits in with the grain and scale and the contours of the site, which I believe, and many residents believe, this new development would not. So it's a matter of judgment, Chairman, and I think I leave it in your capable and expert hand, except if I just say, really the applicant has not helped themselves by what to many people think is the completely indiscriminate felling of trees. An enormous amount of woodland was destroyed before a TPO could be rushed through, and that has left a very, very sour taste in many people's minds, including myself.
Yeah, it's in the committee's hands, it's not mine. Right, okay, councillors, anybody to speak? Councillor Coburn.
Yes, I certainly will associate myself with the dismay at the loss of the trees. I think everyone agrees with that. It was not the way to approach any development. But that having been said, I think this is a good reuse of a piece of land which does in fact have a lot of built form on it. I agree with Councillor Munro in the green belt. We're not supposed to create more harm than is currently there. But, you know, these are 3 dwellings on a 10-acre site. So the space around them is, you know, very generous. And when I look at it, I think they have done a good job in terms of design and layout. So yes, I regret the trees, and yes, you could always do everything that much better. But if we seek perfection on every site, we're never going to achieve anything. And I think, you know, given the vacant nature, I used to drive past Helen Arkell every day on my way to work, and so there's Helen Arkell and drive on, you know. It was part of the feature, and I was very sad when it moved, although it's only gone into Farnham, so we haven't lost it. And I think this is, as I say, given that there's building on it, given that it's just 3 homes on a 10-acre site, I think this is acceptable, and I hope people enjoy living there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other councillor wish to speak? No. Only 9:30. Yeah, right, okay. Right, shall we move to the recommendation then? Okay, we'll move to the recommendation that subject to conditions permission be granted. Those in favour, please raise their hand. Those against? So abstain? 1. I'd like to thank everybody for their patience and forbearance tonight over quite a long agenda. Thank you very much for keeping things rather civil. The next meeting, there's no items to be not public speaking, and there's no items in that session. Therefore, the next meeting is the 28th of June. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.